My name is Steve Krause. I'm the chair of the ACT-IAC Acquisition Management SIG, Shared Interest Group, for those of you who are not familiar with our lingo. I want to welcome everybody here to the third annual ACT-IAC Mythbusters Forum. Now, for those of you, anybody here who's not familiar with Mythbusters and what that means and what that's about, Mythbusters is a concept that originated with the Office of Federal Procurement Policy and memos that were launched in 2011 and 2012 aimed at busting myths or correcting misperceptions on both the government side of the community and the industry side of the community as it related to the ability of both sides to collaborate, communicate, and work together. And starting in 2013, ACT-IAC launched our first Mythbusters Forum in conjunction with OFPP to examine the state of collaboration and communication between the government and the industry, as well as some of the do's and the don'ts and the rules and how to go about it. Here for this year, for the third year of this forum, we've decided to change things up a little bit. And we've decided to put these issues in the context of things like what are the key trends and initiatives that are reshaping the way agencies manage the acquisition process, as well as how do specific, large, and for most of us very interesting procurements that are coming up in the near future reflect these changes in the way that the acquisitions are managed. And then, of course, going back to our initial theme, how do these trends, these philosophies, in some cases mandates or policies, in turn affect the relationship between government and industry in the acquisition process. So that's part of the reason why we've decided to name the forum this year Beyond Mythbusters, because it's beyond just the intent of the memos to bust those myths and correct misperceptions. This year we're actually looking at the hot topics in the industry and then reflecting back on how that relates to the topic of Mythbusters and the intent of this initiative all along. So let's talk for a second about today's agenda and how this forum is going to work. We got a lot of content packed into this morning, and it's going to be not only great from a content perspective, broadcasting out to the audience, but there's going to be opportunities for people to interact with each other and create some of your own content. So when I finish with some of these introductory remarks, we're going to have a keynote talk from Rob Burton, who is formerly Deputy Administrator and Acting Administrator for the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. He's, for several years now, been on the industry side of the community. He has a very interesting perspective and some insights to share with us about where we've been, where we are, and where we're going in the context of government and industry collaboration. Following that, we're going to have two panels, and with each of these panels we'll have an opportunity for table discussion as well. So the first panel is going to be specifically focused on game changers, the things that are happening in the community today that spell changes in the way that acquisitions are being managed from one agency to another, and we're going to have a panel of people coming up and talking about specific things that are happening in various parts of the community. And for the second panel, we're going to actually focus on some of these specific, as I said, interesting and large procurements that are coming up and have an opportunity to examine how these changes are actually taking shape in the context of managing those procurements. After each of these panels, there's going to be a half-hour opportunity for sort of a lightning-fast table discussion. And the way that that's going to work is each of your tables, you'll notice that there should be somebody at your table who has a little black tag on their name badge that says Tables Host. That person has been prepped and prepared to facilitate. Somebody at your table either has been named or needs to be named as a scribe. And you'll see on the table we've got a set of questions, basically a couple of questions for each table. You can choose which question you want to address, but what we're going to ask each table to do is choose one question related to the panel, to that panel discussion, discuss it for about 20 minutes. It's going to be pretty quick. And then at the end of those 20 minutes, we're going to do a real quick share out with a few of the tables And the objective here is, at the end of that 20-minute discussion, to pick the 3 most salient or actionable points that come from the discussion. And for those of you who are scribes, who are lucky enough to be chosen as scribes for this discussion, my one ask of you is try to write something that is legible and comprehensible after the fact, because we are actually going to try to collect what we write and see what comes of that in terms of the collective intelligence of this Illuminati that we have here today. So that's the way these table discussions are going to work. And so we've got a lot to cover between now and about noon. So we are going to get started here shortly. Just a couple of things before we move on to that. I want to take a second to just plug the Acquisition Management SIG, which I lead. And Mike Palmer here is my government co-chair. Mike, stand up so everybody can see you. What we do as a shared interest group is we bring together volunteers from industry and government to work on projects, studies, initiatives, and other things that are sponsored, in effect, by some of our government executives and some of the people on the ACT-IAC Executive Committee. And we are always looking for more volunteers, which is why I wanted to make sure to take some time to plug it. So, for instance, this year alone, some of the things that we've done, we published a study on shared services adoption, and particularly the challenges and best practices that we found across the industry, across the community with regards to the acquisition, the way that agencies acquire shared services from one another. We have a study that's going on right now that's been sponsored by some of our partners at GSA, looking specifically at innovation. And when I say innovation, what I really mean is we all know that government agencies are looking for innovative companies to add to their contracts. How do they identify those companies? How do they evaluate innovation or innovativeness as part of the solicitation? That's something that people really haven't necessarily figured out. And we have a study group focused on that. We also have a group of people who are putting together, in conjunction with OFPP, a series of forums called Lifting the Curtain, which are designed specifically to help government and industry people understand each other better. So these are forums that involve a panel typically of both government people and industry people talking about a particular topic and how that topic looks from both sides of the transom, so to speak. So that's just an example of the types of projects and initiatives we have going on, and we'll have more planned for the upcoming year, so please do let us know if you're interested. And if you have ideas for projects or studies or initiatives that you'd like to see the SIG take up, that you personally would like to lead or participate in, please let us know that as well. Last thing, before I turn over the podium to Rob Burton, is I want to recognize a number of people who were instrumental in bringing this forum to you today. And most noteworthy about this is there's 2 or 3 people who I really want to recognize who ironically could not even be here today. So that includes, by the way, our industry chair for the event, Cindy Brockwell, and our government chair for the event, Tiffany Hickson, both of whom are out of town with either busy travel schedules or other things going on. But both of these women spent countless hours providing a lot of insight and direction and really helping build the agenda and the panels for today. And we would not have this forum here today without the 2 of them and their tireless efforts. The third person who's also not here is I want to thank Rachel Lynch, who's a member of the ACT-IAC staff, who helped put together a lot of the logistics for today. And she's not here because she gave birth on Friday. Great news for being absent. We gave her a pass for that. Finally, I want to recognize people who were members of the planning committee, because there were a number of people who helped make this forum here go. Some, if not all of which, are here in the room. If I call your name, please stand up just to be recognized. Lisa Akers, Gail Greenwald, Bob Hart, Luke Karastesi, R.M. Asmanian, Joni Newhart, Harrison Smith, and Sam Galbrail, among others. I'll probably miss a couple as well. All of them deserve a quick round of applause. And with that, my remarks are over. Now we can get on to the real show. And speaking of show, first up, Rob Burton, former Deputy Director. Thank you very much, Rob.
Steve, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here with you folks today. And I want to compliment ACT-IAC for, this is your third Mythbusters Forum, which is really quite impressive. I mean, I was also impressed with what my friends at OFPP have been doing here for the last several years. It sort of was strange. You know, I had a career in the federal government for over 30 years, and now here I am sort of representing the industry point of view. It's quite an interesting transition. Somebody said, well, what's so different now about being in the private sector than having been in the government? And I'll tell you, I'm much more interesting as a public speaker because I can say pretty much anything I want to. Remember those boring talking points? I had all these boring talking points in the government. I had to follow these talking points, which were approved by all of these honchos at OMB. And they wouldn't let me out, you know, unless they approved my talking points. And I've got to tell you, they're boring, you know? And now, hey, this is great. I can be very provocative. And so I know one thing that the sponsors here, the people planning this forum want to do is really generate substantive recommendations with respect to how we can improve industry-government communication. And I have to tell you, I was so pleased to speak at this today because the topic of improving industry-government communications really is a topic I'm very interested in. And one thing I have concluded in my 35-year career is this is the most serious problem in the acquisition system. There's no question in my mind that the lack of communication between industry and government is the #1 problem by far facing our acquisition system, because almost every other problem has its root cause in the lack of communication between government and industry. So I congratulate ACT-IAC for emphasizing this topic for the last several years. I congratulate OFPP for issuing the 2 Mythbuster memos in 2011 and 2012, which really identified the problem. I don't think the memos are a solution to the problem. I do think the recognition of the problem is hugely important, because unless you know you've got a problem, you're not going to be able to solve it. But one thing I did learn during my time at OFPP is you got to do more than issue a memo. You know, just issuing the memo is not going to do it. And I also learned, because some people told me when I was in the government, you know, you need to get somebody higher level to issue these memos because nobody's going to listen to you. And, you know, very good point. So what we started doing at OFPP was having things issued by the OMB director, the deputy director for management. The political appointees are going to be listening to those folks. And having those memos issued at that level is absolutely critical. And then to have them fed down to the agency rank and file personnel, absolutely critical. There's got to be a memo coming from the secretary or the deputy secretary down to the mid-level echelon. And I don't see this happening a lot with a lot of government initiatives, which occurs to me that that's a suggestion that some things are a priority and some things are not a priority. And if you look at the Mythbusters memo, I mean, I have not found the corresponding memos at the agency level coming from the highest level saying, you know, we view improving industry communications and the acquisition cycle in particular of the utmost importance. This is a priority. And I don't know, maybe they're out there, but I haven't seen them. And I've had a number of conversations with contracting personnel that have no idea what I'm talking about when I talk about the Mythbusters memo. The senior procurement executives, on the other hand, definitely got the memo. I cannot believe how gracious they are with their time. They are incredibly open to industry. They are truly interested in industry's perspective and recommendations for innovation and process. They always seem to find time. So that means they're giving it a priority. But I don't see the same priority and the same interest going down to the mid-level program managers and contracting personnel, because this is an issue with both program managers and contracting personnel. And I know one thing we did at OFPP when I was there with the FACT PPM, rolling that out in 2007, was trying to get those two communities which form the acquisition system in the United States government to talk. Very difficult to get program managers and contracting personnel to talk. And oftentimes I've seen in situations just recently with program managers, if they do talk, they just say, here's how we're going to do it, thanks for your interest, but we don't really care what your contracting people have to say. That's a problem. I mean, it's a real problem. And this lack of communication, I think one of the most serious results from it is that it really impacts the pre-award process big time. The pre-award process is when you define the requirements and get the procurement set on track or off track. And every legal issue that I've dealt with throughout my career, the root cause of the problem is oriented in the lack of clear definition of requirements. That is a huge problem, and I think it's partly, well, greatly related to the fact that agencies are not doing robust market research, they are not talking to industry, they're not listening to what kind of innovative capabilities industry has. I never appreciated so much what industry has to offer, except now that I'm in industry, I've heard a lot of these presentations myself, where clients are briefing me on their capabilities and their recommendations for improving government programs. They're quite impressive. And I don't know that the government is listening to some of those recommendations. And there's no question that we now have some serious issues facing us, more so than ever, especially with budget challenges and so forth. So it's hard to overemphasize, I think, how important this issue is. And I do think that you've got it both in the pre-award process and the post-award process as well. And I'm going to be touching on some of that. Now, let me just talk a little bit about the problem. Because I think we all know, and OFPP certainly has done a good job of identifying the problem. But the question really is, why do we have this problem? I mean, why is it so systemic, and why has it been here for, as long as we can remember? I think the oversight community has some blame for this. I mean, the IG community is really pumped up. They are much more aggressive than I ever remember. We have some small business clients that are facing criminal action from the Department of Justice based on IG investigations. And in my view, these transgressions or alleged criminal actions are nothing but honest mistakes. And it is amazing to me that we are spending taxpayer resources going after these small businesses. And some of the money involved is fairly nominal in government speak. And yet the Department of Justice is going, nope, you made a false claim, you made a false statement, whatever, you made a misrepresentation of the government, we're coming after you for some major dollars. This has a chilling effect both on industry and government as well, as far as having good communications. Government contracting personnel are also subject to IG review, and criticism. I think that is one of the problems. I think this oversight is definitely having a chilling effect, and yet Congress wants more oversight. Congress is in a mode of let's have more oversight. Throughout my career, I've seen the pendulum swing. We sometimes say let's partner with industry, and everybody is given kudos for partnering. Then the pendulum swings, and we have an arm's length relationship. You're hearing that term a lot now, arm's length relationship. Watch out for those industry people. They're up to no good. This attitude I'm seeing more than I would like. And I think it's partly rooted into this increase in the oversight emphasis that I'm talking about. But I think all of this is very damaging to our acquisition system. I don't think this is healthy at all. And I do, again, I don't mean to give OFPP too much credit here, but they just issued this Acquisition 360 memo at the end, which I was very impressed with, because it's asking for feedback from both internal stakeholders within the government as well as external stakeholders, i.e. industry. And it starts off, the very first sentence is just what I'm talking about here. Successful acquisitions depend on a clear understanding of the market capabilities, and this requires early and meaningful engagement with industry. Wow. That first sentence is absolutely right. the market, understanding what market capabilities are out there will lead to well-defined requirements, which will lead to a good procurement, which will reduce disputes on the back end. All of this is so connected to that early engagement with industry and the discussion. Now let's talk about what is communication? You know, the very definition of communication, I think, is somewhat open for discussion. I know a lot of my friends in the government view it as information sharing. I don't know how many times I've been told, hey, things are better than ever, because we have more information on our website than ever before. So what you need to do is you need to go look at our website. It's got tons of information. So we're communicating with industry more than ever before. So let me bust this myth. You know, there is a myth out there that communication is better than ever before. I say it's not. I actually think it may be worse than ever before. Even with OFPP's recognition of the problem and the attention they're giving to the problem. I think it's a real challenge because industry views communication as interactive dialogue, i.e. probably looking at you face to face. That is very difficult to do. Everybody's very busy, the acquisition workforce is overworked. I remember a contracting officer telling me, I don't have time to meet with these people. I mean, you know, I'm not gonna get my job done. I can't get my job done. I had a director of small business at a major agency tell me, hey look, you know, I don't have time to be meeting with these small businesses. You know, I mean, those are a lot of them. And I was just dumbfounded. I was like, wow, where's that PD? But the response was, hey, we have industry days. Now you come to an industry day and I'll talk to these folks for 5 or 10 minutes. This is not good communication. You know, this is not what industry views as interactive communication. And I think it's absolutely critical that the priorities within the government shift. Because I think everybody has time to do what they think is of high priority. And I believe that the communication with industry, other than at the senior procurement executive level, is not really viewed as a high priority. And I think leaders within the government have to take some responsibility for this at every level with respect to transmitting the message that this is of highest priority, especially within the acquisition system, in order for the acquisition system to work well. So I know that the folks sponsoring this forum want to have some recommendations. And that's what you're going to be doing during the table discussions. You're actually going to be coming up with some concrete recommendations for improving the acquisition process and for improving communication between industry and government. So I'm going to kick this off because I've got some recommendations here for you. And I think this will get you thinking. With respect to, I think we already touched upon the memo. You know, the memo is like a first start, but the memo's got to come at every agency. It's got to come from the highest level of the agency. I think that is absolute, and it can't be 27 pages long. Okay, so the Mythbuster memos, if you add them together, they're 27 pages long. People are not going to read 27 pages. You know, I remember, you know, when I was at OFPP, one of my friends on the Hill called me up and said, you know, these reports that you're submitting to the committee, they're too damn long, and we don't read them. So you need to get it down. You need to get it down, so we'll read it, and you know where we file it. And so I thought, wow, that's interesting. So it's got to be short, folks. It's got to be short and to the point, especially if it's coming from a high-level official, and it doesn't need to say much. It would be just maybe 1.5 pages. This is important to me. As head of the agency, this is important to me. I want it to be important to you. I want you to communicate with industry. And I want you to work on those requirements. I want them to be really clear, crisp, concise requirements in our acquisitions. This is really simple, and yet it's so difficult. You know, it's so difficult for the government. We continue to see issues reach the GAO high risk list. I mean, first time ever we've seen IT program management, which I thought was doing pretty well, reach the GAO high risk list for the first time. So I have a theory that a lot of this is related to the lack of communication. I think that if that is solved, we'll be well ahead of the game. So let me give you my recommendations. I think debriefings, I saw that word debriefings in each of the Mythbusters memos and in the Acquisition 360 memo, which was just issued by OFPP. Let me tell you, this is an area where it can be easily fixed. Industry is incredibly frustrated. The debriefings after award that are required by regulation are really poor. Generally speaking, are really poor. I remember one debriefing I received with a client had said, hey, you're great. You are technically excellent in every category. Your price is reasonable. It is realistic. Congratulations. And so they're thinking, well, why didn't we get, why didn't we get the award? I mean, we're going to protest. So we protest, and sure enough, if you look behind the curtain there, our client was the highest price by far. Now, had the government communicated that very basic fact, there would have been no bid protest. And I am to this day just dumbfounded that that basic fact was not communicated in the debriefing. And there are pockets of excellence, though, on this subject within the government. For example, recently an attorney had me in. They said, look, you go ahead and take a look at the file. They redacted some very obvious proprietary information, but that was fine. You go ahead and take a look, and you decide, should you protest this particular award? So I took a look. He sat there. We had an interactive dialogue. I asked him questions. And I went back to the client and said, you're going to lose this protest if you file. So I recommend you do not file. Now, what if I had gone the other way? What if I said, yeah, I think we better file. There's some stuff there, and it's really interesting. So what? Because the government, I'm going to see the file anyway after we file the protest. So why not go ahead and let me look at it up front and look at it beforehand? And maybe I will concur, yeah, this is going to be a waste of the client's money. It's going to be a waste of the government's money. We are not pursuing this case. Why not go ahead and try to get that result? The worst case scenario is that the contractor files a protest, which they may have done anyway. So these are best practices which the government definitely needs to identify, which they definitely need to get the word out. There's nothing wrong with that kind of interactive communication and dialogue. The fact that briefings is mentioned in every 3 of these OFPP memos, I think tells you something. And I think it's a real problem. And I also recommend that the FAR be changed, and one of the big problems here are FAR Part 8 procurements that require no debriefing, but they require a brief explanation. And believe me, that is exactly what agencies are giving, a very brief explanation. And that is all they are required to do by regulation. So that, in my mind, is a problem. The federal government spends most of its procurement dollars vis-a-vis task orders. Industry spends an enormous amount of money preparing proposals. I never quite understood this when I was in the government, how much industry spends on preparing these proposals, millions and millions of dollars. They are entitled to have some constructive feedback with respect to why they didn't win. And if it results in a protest, so be it. But in most cases that I'm familiar with, the contractor really wants to know, what did we do wrong? And they really do want to know for purposes of future competitions. And I think that basic communication is so vitally important to the health of our acquisition system. And it's simply not being done, especially on task order procurements, and it's not required to be done by regulation. It should be required, and also oral debriefings should be encouraged, not written debriefings. Again, industry wants interactive communication, not just mere information. And so this is just an example of where I think the government can improve very quickly and have substantial benefits for both industry and the government. There are a number of best practices out there. One is, which I've seen at DHS, is to have an industry liaison. What a great idea, I tell you. And these folks are doing just a super job. And they have these industry liaisons at every component within DHS. And industry absolutely is so appreciative of it, I cannot tell you. Because the perfect example, right? DHS is a huge agency. It is very difficult to navigate. It is very difficult for people to know where should I go? I mean, I want to show what kind of capabilities I have and innovative solutions for the government. I've shown it at other agencies. I have a track record. Where can I go within this agency to meet the right program managers or contracting officials that maybe? You need to have that industry liaison who, number one, can sort of filter through and make sure they're not passing on somebody that's not terribly worthy. But really, industry's struggling. Who's who within an agency? It's so confusing, and I don't think the government's terribly transparent in that regard as to who's who and what their responsibilities are. Industry's very appreciative of these industry liaisons. Liaison is a best practice that should be adopted in every federal agency. And I am seeing more of it. And that's what their job is. The industry liaison's job is to facilitate communication between industry and government. That is great. And that also shows that management, the highest levels of the agency, think this is important. They have putting a full-time person to focus on improving industry-government relations. Absolutely a best practice. Now I want to mention, now this doesn't go to interactive communication, but I do want to mention the FOIA, the Federal Information Act. The Freedom of Information Act, absolutely broken in my mind. And I think Congress is going to have to intervene on this point. I think they're going to have to change it. Because it is absolutely amazing to me how, and I remember when I was at the Department of Defense, you know, we took these FOIA requests so seriously and we spent so much time on them when we were redacting this sentence or meaning, oh, is that proprietary? Let's, enormous amount of time spent on it. I'm not seeing that. I can't tell you how many FOIA requests I've submitted on behalf of clients, and the results have been pretty pathetic. The most interesting example was one a year later. They called up and wrote an email. Said, hey, you know, that request you submitted a year ago, are you still interested in that? Document, because it's going to take a really long time to get. And if you still want that document, you better be waiting. You're going to be waiting. Now, the interesting thing about that FOIA request, I requested one document. I told them where to find it. And so this, to me, is proof the FOIA system is broken. And then recently I got a response, 50 pages, every single page, 100% redacted. Yeah, and I thought, well, now that's helpful. You know, that's well, this is responded. You know, and so, you know, when I was in the government back in the old days, and we're going back a few years, the message was, if in doubt, release. If in doubt, release. Today, it's if in doubt, withhold. There is no question that that's the philosophy, and I think it's related again to this systemic problem we have about the arm's length relationship. Don't give industry anything if you can avoid it. There is that attitude, and it's with the legal offices. You know, the legal offices have some of the blame here because they don't want any risk. And in their view, not saying anything is the low risk approach. I disagree. I think not saying anything actually results in more good protests, I can assure you. And so that not saying anything is not necessarily the low risk option. So again, just some recommendations there for you. I'm going to keep you on track, Steve. I'm going to keep you on track. And I could go on for a fairly significant period of time with respect to what recommendations I have. But I really am interested in hearing the table discussions and hearing what you all have as recommendations for improving communication, which I think is synonymous with improving our acquisition system. And again, I want to congratulate the folks here.
Time for a couple questions.
Well, sure. I didn't want to get you. Okay, let's do interactive dialogue. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, anybody have a question? I'm happy to entertain a question. And if not, I will be here through most of the morning. Questions or comments? Comments, anybody? Did this strike anybody as, yeah, he's on track, or who knows what he's doing? Any type of reaction? Oh, that's positive, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yes,
Hey, Rob, you gave us several good reasons on the issues that we're addressing. Any innovative ideas that you have on how to solve it?
Of the communication problem?
Yes.
The communication. Well, again, I don't want to be repetitive, But it is absolutely critical to have high-level management support for this. I think it should be a topic at the President's Management Council meetings. I think that, and once you're done is not the right solution. My guess is it has not been on the agenda for the President's Management Council. It should be that memo has got to come from the very highest levels, and there has to be a corresponding memo in every single federal agency, and it has to say, this is one of the top priorities of this agency, is to have dialogue with industry across the board.
And there's probably some way to account, hold them accountable and traceable.
But well, yeah, I mean, and you can talk about putting in your performance appraisal and so forth. But I mean, I don't think we've done the basics yet. I don't think the basics have been done. And until you do the basics, again, I go back to OFPP, at least they have identified the problem. And you do have the Office of Federal Procurement Policy saying, this is a problem. The fact that they've introduced really 3 memos on this topic, I think says they know it's a problem. But now, and I know how hard it is to communicate solutions down at the lower levels. It's very difficult, and OFPP can only do so much. That's why I'm suggesting, because I think a lot of people look at OFPP and say, hey, it's your job. No, it really is a higher level. It's a higher level priority that has to be embraced. Otherwise, the government's not going to solve the problem. And I guess my biggest concern is, I think we're taking a step back. I think the level of communication, I heard about this when I was at OFPP. I mean, I don't know how many times industry said, hey, look, you got a communication problem. And I started these quarterly meetings with industry groups that were really beneficial, and actually some bar cases arose out of those quarterly meetings with industry. That kind of dialogue, that interactive dialogue, was so very important at the OFPP level. But I'm wondering to what extent it's being done at every level within our acquisition system. And so it's not an easy problem to solve. I think it has definitely gotten worse over the years, and then certainly my clients tell me it's worse than ever before, and they've been in this business for as long or longer than I have. So I can't dismiss some of the anecdotal stories I've heard, and I do think it is a matter of priority, and I think that's a leadership issue. Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Do you know, or could you help us understand what might be going on in the policy realm to help training for contracting officers that includes very detailed case studies of where effective communications have taken place in large, complex acquisitions where there hasn't been a protest, or even in some of the smaller environments where effective communications have paid off and have not resulted in protest?
Very good point, and I want to give DHS credit again on this issue. They have started training their contracting personnel. I hope they're still doing it. They were a couple of years ago, having training sessions on how to conduct a good debriefing, how to have interactive dialogue, what you should cover, what you shouldn't. They have industry come in and give horror stories and give recommendations for improvement. That kind of training really should be done at every federal agency. That is clearly a best practice that DHS has embraced, and I think other agencies should follow that example.
Yeah, I'm thinking even earlier in the process, the discussions prior to an RFI being issued, after an RFI has been issued, during the procurement process where the doors don't close and industry is held completely outside the process.
That's really a good point. I don't think there is training on market research, and I have had a number of contracting people say, well, you can't do that. I can't talk to industry. That's wrong. That is a real problem. The fact that there's that myth out there, which is still alive and well, that there is a training issue there. I steered a little bit away from training on purpose in this presentation because so many people want to blame everything on lack of training. And I don't think that's the case with the lack of communication between government and industry. I don't think it's principally a training issue. But can training help on that point, as you raised? It could. It could help tremendously, because a lot of contracting personnel truly think it's improper to have that kind of a dialogue with industry at any point in the process. And they think, hey, we're just doing industry days, and we're doing RFIs. And that is not the kind of communication I think the government would really wants or needs, because it's limited information in the context of an industry day or a request for information. The government's getting limited information. Any other thoughts? Last parting thoughts? Yes, sir.
Just coincided through the focus shouldn't be on contract officers, contracting folks, when we talk about long lease. It should be on program. They are the prime responsibility of our those are the folks that really need to be trained and talk to you about, hey, what is market research, how do you do it, when you do it.
That's an excellent point. That is an excellent point, actually. And I do think, though, contracting personnel should be familiar with the issue because they can play a very vital role in helping the industry navigate, and I think they can be very helpful in getting to the program manager. But you're right, I have noticed in particular program managers being part of the problem, that they are some of the folks that are the least communicative, and they probably have a need to be the most communicative. So I think very good point. I want to wish you all the very best in your efforts to improve the dialogue between industry and government, which you are doing here today, and all of your efforts to improve our acquisition system. Thank you very much.
Okay, as we transition to panel one, I'm going to ask the panel one participants to come up. And I have to tell you something. I talked to Mary Davey this morning, and she was very excited. She said, we've got a rock star panel.
We do.
And I don't think she was just saying that because she's on the panel.
Okay, do whatever you can.
Okay, so as the panel comes up to the stage, I'm going to introduce Dan Chenick, who's going to be our moderator for panel one. Dan, I think most of you know Dan. Dan is actually the chair of ACT-IAC. He's also the head of the IBM Center for the Business of Government. But a long time ago, he also was at OMB for how many years? 14 good long years. So, Dan, let me go.
Great. Good morning, everybody. And I want to thank Steve and the committee for organizing this terrific event, the third annual. And thank all of you for taking time out of your very busy schedules to help the government move forward and industry move forward in myth busting. It's my honor to introduce our panel. So, I also want to thank Robert. Rob, you still in the room? There you are, right in front. So Rob was a great colleague for years at OMB, and we got in more trouble together than we probably care to admit, but later if we have an event at the bar, we'll tell you about that part of it. But of course, we're here with a terrific panel of government leaders, and this is, I'm here in a dual hat program. Of course, it talks about my role at IBM, leading essentially a think tank for the public sector that IBM runs, and of course I'm ending my year as chair of IAC, and I've had the pleasure to work with many of you in that capacity, and know that next year IAC will be in fantastic hands with Ted Davies as chair of IAC, and Margie Graves from DHS as chair or president of IAC. So another terrific year coming up. And so now I'm just going to, just before I introduce the panel, just a little bit of information about all of you. How many about government? Let me get those words. And how many for industry? Okay, is there anybody who didn't raise their hand? Okay, Jason, no, that would be you. Okay, and then how many are actually acquisition, like 1102 pure acquisition teams? And how many from program, functional? Okay, interesting, so a lot of government, a lot of procurement activities in the room. So we're all going to get into a great discussion going forward. So I have the honor of being with a fantastic panel of government leaders, many of whom I've had the pleasure of working with for years. And so I'm going to keep the introduction short so we can get into the discussion. You have their current titles in your agenda. I'll just say a little bit about each one of them going down the line in terms of how they're listed. Soraya Korea, who's the Chief Procurement Officer at DHS, has had a long career. I've worked with Soraya in a number of different agency hats that she's worn, GSA, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, pre-DHS, et cetera. So Soraya brings a terrific understanding of this perspective from a number of different agency roles. Mary Davey who leads so much of the government's activity in terms of buying from GSA. She's in charge of all of GSA's IT acquisition policy under the Federal Acquisition Service. Mary's a former president of the American Council of Technology Act, so she wears a number of hats and is a great leader in our community. Leslie Field, also a former colleague from OMB of many years, and a great representative of the procurement community and the acquisition community within the White House, up to and including the very highest levels. In fact, I think you're in a meeting with Joseph Higher not that long ago. That's right, they're listening. Greg Gibbons, at the end. Greg, of course, at VA comes from a long career at DHS and DOD, and Greg and I have been involved in an initiative involving program management and acquisition for many years that we refer to as the Breakfast Club. And Jim Williams there in the back of the room, I see, is also a charter member of the Breakfast Club. We're not about the movie with Molly Ringwald. It's more about how do we get together and talk about how to solve the Nettleson program management issues that have been involved in government and industry for many years. And then finally, Mark Natter, closest to me. Mark is leading so much innovation at HHS, in the HHS Buyers Club, and really leading the government by example in what they're doing in terms of the very significant changes they're making to how you can work within the FAR to get procurement done in a way that really provides value to agencies. So we're really very fortunate to have a terrific panel of experts and leaders with us today. Leslie, I wanted to start with you. If you could sort of give an overview from you've seen the myth-busting events going on, you actually helped write the myth-busting memos. Talk about where we are currently and sort of the evolution of this process going forward.
Sure, and I'd sort of like to just set the stage for kind of what we're doing in academia, and then we will focus on the myth-busting part of it. So back in December, our administrator, Ann Ron, set forth a blueprint to help us buy better, more efficiently and more effectively. So when we started looking at how best to do this, we said, you know what, there's $275 billion worth of common spend. 275 out of the 460 or so that we spent last year. So that really sort of focused our attention on the fact that we needed to do more category management, we needed to evolve strategic sourcing to sort of a broader objective, which was to kind of get our spend under better management. We mapped out 10 super categories. We're doing our deepest dive in IET. We're standing up some structure and some governance around software. We're looking at policies around workstations. We're doing a lot in this space to try and raise the visibility of existing contracts, start sharing information like prices paid. We've got the acquisition gateway thanks to our friends at GSA, and so we're really starting to kind of get organized around category management. And why are we doing this? Well, we've got lots of IT challenges, lots of challenges in general. So we want to take our most difficult problems and spend a little bit more time on them. So if we can get our common spend under management, we can have a little bit more time for driving innovation and governance. And what are we doing there? We recognize that we need to give our workforce the tools and the training that they need to leverage the innovative work that a lot of the small companies are doing. And Mark will talk a little bit about the Buyers Club, but I will say that there's great commitment within OPP, within OMB, and the executive office to try and drive innovation to get more small businesses, more startups in the door, reduce the barriers to entry so that we've got some new thinking when it comes to IT. You've heard about U.S. digital services, where Joni is leading many efforts around the IT acquisition workforce and making sure that the folks that are, the 1102s and contracting folks who are working with those digital service experts and trying to buy IT, especially our more complex services, that they've got the training and they understand what available authorities and tools there are out there. We set up the tech bar, which is really nothing new. It's just repackaging the authorities that we already have, and then presenting it to the acquisition workforce in such a way that it makes sense. We started doing podcasts. We didn't know what podcasts were until we started doing podcasts. And so, we're trying innovative ways to get the word to the workforce. Joni led an effort on challenge.gov to get some more innovative thinking into how we train our folks. People are learning in different ways these days. I took the metro this morning, and everybody's on their cell phones and on their devices learning things, or reading the news, I don't know. One of the two. But this, we need to get to more innovative space. We've sought some enhanced legislative authorities to help us with getting our more rope buys sort of under control, using some of the existing authorities, and then trying to spur innovation and making it a safer space for folks to come into the government. So we've got category management to help us with our coming spin. We've got a lot of innovative efforts underway to try and bring in new talent and develop the talent that we already have. And then we want to strengthen our vendor relationships. We were very clear in our memorandum in December that we can't do any of this unless we've got a really good relationship with industry. And what does that mean? When we talked about the myth-busting memos that we did a couple of years ago, the focus was on, hey, nothing new, but here's what you can do, government. Here's what you can do and should do, industry. And I think it worked for a while. But just like anything else, you issue paper and people go, that's great. And then after a while, people kind of go back to perhaps their old practices. And so the reason we wanted to do the Act 360, which we issued a couple months ago, was to get some data around how are we really doing with all of this? What does industry think about XYZ agency's procurement process on a particular transaction? We wanted to start with IT because we're doing our deepest dive in IT. We wanted to see how the agencies were engaging with vendors, when they were engaging with vendors. Were they encouraging innovation? And then we also wanted to see, hey, internally, it makes a difference how your teams are getting along. And Mark can talk a little bit about how we're trying to improve that. How did the acquisition office think the program office did, and vice versa? So we not always about rating the contracting officer, we wanted the program offices also to be sort of qualified. And so putting those two bits of data together, I think would be illustrative in how we are doing as a government. It's a tool for the agencies to use. It's not something that we want to use as a hammer over folks, but we do want that to be a management tool that agencies can use to improve their processes, to engage, to innovate, and then to award them to ensure excellent content.
Thanks, Leslie. Great overview. So, Mary, if I could talk to you, given your government-wide perspective, there's sort of a big new kid on the block, and that's Qatar, and for how it's affecting acquisition, and many in the audience are kind of getting used to what that talks about. Can you put that in the context of this and how that might help move forward in terms of government industry collaboration?
Yep, I can. Before I do that, can I just really quickly respond to something that Rob was saying about just the overall theme of collaboration, and maybe it's worse now? And I think, some of what Rob, I think you intended to sort of convey was you have so much in the way of online ability now that people might be replacing, I got a great website, I got this way you can submit the information, we can do things like that. And I think that should be an enabler, but not the end all. And so just a couple of examples, in GSA we're doing a couple of really large procurements right now. One is the Enterprise Infrastructure Solutions Program that's replacing the telecommunications national program networks as well as the regional contracts. And the other one's the Alliant 2 GWACs replacing Alliant Small Business. And over the course of the last couple of years, starting with the telecom group and now with the GWAC group, not only are we using the online platforms, right? So we have an Interact site, which is a way for us to share information, people to comment on it. But that also, it's not the only way to do this. And so those two groups, and I think for those of you in industry that are looking at these procurements and have interest, would nod your head and say, GSA, I think you're doing a great job. And I'm just really proud of the folks because of the interaction. So we have got not only industry days and not only draft, RFPs and RFIs, but there's been well over 100 industry one-on-ones and market research, as well as people who responded to these draft RFPs. And we've got customer or agency working groups with us on each of these things, helping us every step of the way with the market research, the requirements, what's the future look like, what's going on in your agency. So I think it has to be really sort of well-rounded. There has to be a lot of one-on-one engagement, and so we're doing that, and we're seeing some really great results, not only in the way of requirements, but the engagement from the agency saying, yeah, I'd like to make this my vehicle. I will work with you to do that. So that to me is just, I am really excited by what we've been doing in that space. I've been, just thrilled with the agency participation, the industry participation, and we're going to continue to do more of that in GSA. That's sort of our standard now. I think it's just critical. VITARA to me, this is some extremely important legislation because it's continuing to highlight the fact that IT acquisition and IT is really important in government. We spend, we say about $80 billion. People wonder sometimes about where you're getting for the money. How are those systems really supporting the agencies? How can they sort of take the do more for less, thing that we're all under and use IT to sort of facilitate, service to the citizen. But the fact that the CIOs now in legislation, are mandated to be part of the acquisition process, the planning process across their agencies, across bureaus, to be in sort of, the approval chain of contracts really does encourage change in behavior and the way that we have to think about our planning and, what the agency is doing, across the country, across the world, and how we're gonna use IT. So I'm excited by that, and I think, people say, gosh, is it gonna slow things down? Are we gonna see less contracts? Well, hopefully it won't slow things down, but it'll give us, more of a strategic view of what we're doing with IT and a better way to spend our money. And, what I've seen across all the agencies that I've worked with a number of years and all the different bureaus is there's some really good work out there that often doesn't, come to light across an agency at a high level. So I think this could be a good way to do that. And then with software, we're working with L&D and DoD on that part of the FTAR legislation on looking at enterprise licensing for government and establishing an enterprise license agreement. So that's a really interesting challenge, and we, we're going at it sort of tactically and strategically with what kinds of software, what does the government spend on what kind of software, how much are we paying for it, how different is what we're paying for it based on terms and conditions, and then what can we do with the agencies to identify specific kinds of software that we want, put in place, a single way to sort of go after that, procure it, and then establish an enterprise license agreement for different kinds of software for government, and that's a huge new step too. But it's beyond acquisition. We have to know what we're buying, like Leslie said, what we're paying for it, and how we're managing those assets. How many people know how many licenses they have for, fill in the blank, and are they active, and how often are you renegotiating, and how do you do your true-up process? And it's a huge challenge, but I think, again, this legislation will really help us make some progress.
Thanks, Mary, and thanks, Leslie. Great government-wide perspectives to start off. Greg, if I could turn to you, a lot of the discussion this morning and the sort of stage setting that we just heard about is intended to drive greater collaboration across the acquisition, program management, and technology functional communities. Thinking, you've been in a number of different kinds of roles as a program leader, an acquisition leader. Comment on that role of the myth and reality in terms of what keeps them from talking to one another. Are we in a better place now? Can we move forward?
I don't think we're in a better place. I don't. And from the years ago when we were meeting as part of the Breakfast Club, I think we're still in a place where we're not clearly defined roles and responsibility. I think we talk about procurement, we talk about little a acquisition, big A acquisition, all with the same words, and they're different. We have different roles to play, and I believe as we collaborate, we need to really have a foundation of what are our roles and responsibilities, what do we need to bring to the table. A sports analogy, if you look at sports teams that do really well, they don't have people that play the same position. They have people that play their position, they play their position well, and they know a lot about what the player left and right of them are playing. I got a tenth grader that plays a lot of soccer, so I get to watch a lot of soccer. About to get where I can understand it, actually. But there'll be times, if you watch soccer, and Rob, you can relate to this, they'll pass the ball, and when they pass the ball, the person they're passing to is not where the ball's going to be. But they know how they're operating so that they're moving really as a unit. And they're not playing each other's position. They know their position, but they know the other positions on the field. And that allows them to really come together and collaborate. I don't think we as the program management community, we don't really have a program management community. So if I were Galaxy Commander, I would change OFPP. I'm not gas commander, so no you. Right, so I don't want to get nervous. It would be the Office of Procurement Program Management Policy. It's the Office of Procurement Policy. And I'm telling you, I grew up out in the field as a program manager, and OFPP was not relevant in my life because I'm not a procurement person. But it should be, and I'm not saying I was doing the right thing, I'm just saying what I was doing. We don't have a place across the federal government where program management can look up their various functional stream and go, here's a person that cares about what I do as a functional expert in the government. Here in 1102, there's a clear chain to OTP, and that's the person that's shepherding, caring, feeding for the procurement organization? Are they getting the right training? Have we got the right policy? We got nobody in the program is doing that for the functional work of program managers. They're left to fend for themselves, or we're all figured out, maybe, maybe not, but we're gonna blame you anyway. We've got lots of oversight. There's lots of people coming in to tell you how you did it wrong, but nobody's interested in how to tell you to do it right. And I think that culture is not one that breeds collaboration. And I think I believe, we as the federal government have to wrap our arms around this and understand there's a role for that. I know there's some pending legislation, which I think is great, but frankly, from an administration perspective, we shouldn't wait for the Hill to tell us what the right thing to do is. We ought to stand tall and take a stand and say, we need to recognize this is a functional capability that the federal government has to have. We used to be in the federal government a lot of doers. We're not much doers anymore. We're more managers and facilitators of things getting happened. We don't turn the wrenches, use as much as we do. Now we're engaging with industry. And the things that, Rob, you talked about in terms of supplier and vendor relationships, I was liking that until I realized you're actually now getting a tasking from your little talk, so I'm not quite too happy. I know people, frankly, right now tasking me. Our secretary has for us in the VA, my VA, and it's great to have Tom here who's leading one of these. He talks about the veteran experience. He talks about the employee experience. That's his number one and number two. He believes we can't have the right veteran experience if we don't have the right employee experience. Just because I know you're curious about it, the other three things are performance improvement using Lean Six Sigma, strategic partnerships, and shared services, support services excellence, which is the group that Tom you're doing. So he's got his 5. For me, I now, thanks to Rob, have to add for me kind of a 6, and that's the vendor experience. And I don't think we can have the right veteran experience, if we can have the right employee experience if we're not having the right vendor experience. And right now, I would say if you were to poll the vendors that work with the VA, you can get an interesting response. That's not very flattering, but probably true. So thanks, Rob. Now make a little note when I'm sitting back with my friends from VA. I got something else to do. So Dan, I think you're absolutely right. We got to get that collaboration, but I think until we get grounded and we provide a framework and a functional advocacy for program managers, they're going to feel like they're left out. And if you're feeling left out and hammered, collaboration is not at the top of your list of things you want to do. You're looking to survive. You're not looking to thrive. And we need people to thrive.
Interesting observation. I think we will see some more on this issue. I'm actually joining a panel of the National Academy of Public Administration around program management. It's going to be looking at this issue. So we'll be talking about this with you and Jim and other leaders, and would welcome perspectives from others. But let me turn to Soraya. You've seen this from a number of different agency perspectives, government, industry, and I know you've got some interesting things going on in procurement innovation, which may help drive through this. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I want to touch on something that Rick said, though, because I agree with Brett that the analogy of the team is excellent, because I've long held, and I've held both the program management role as well as the contracting officer role. So I sat on both sides of the fence, and I think we don't define those roles well enough. And then when we do, we silo them. So we keep the procurement folks out of the room until there's a PR or there's money, and then we go, hey, procurement people, here, go get something awarded. And meanwhile, back at the ranch, we sat around at a table as program managers, and we were program managers at the time, and all of us do this, by the way, and we cooked up a budget and a procurement schedule with some really smart people in the room that may or may not know a lot about procurement and the procurement processes of the agency, but we cooked it up, and we set expectations based on what we cooked up without talking to those procurement people over there, and then we toss it over the fence and go, why can't you get it done for me? Or worse, we get upset when they go, not that way. So I agree with your analogy that it is about bringing that team together, all the elements of the team together. And at the very early stages, when we're thinking that we have a requirement, that's the way I like to describe it, and that's one of the first things that I'm doing from the innovation standpoint. Many of my innovations are not innovations. the things that we should be doing, that probably are even spelled out in the car, we just not haven't been using them, or we haven't been using the right mix of things in the right way. And I'm trying to find ways to get people to start thinking about, look at all these great tools that we've got out here, let's pull them together in different ways and use them. So for example, at DHS, we are focused on acquisition management, the overall process that is acquisition. From the moment you think you have the requirement to the moment you put it to bed. You bought it, you used it, and then you put it to bed. So we're looking at the entire process, starting with the Joint Requirements Council, where we were putting together a team of people that is cross-component, where we look at requirements across the agency to solve problems in mission space, not just looking at CBP or USCIS or DHS headquarters. It's really looking across the spectrum to then evolving that program, developing the budget, developing a life cycle estimate, having the right governance structure to make sure that the proper equities are involved, that we're monitoring the program and making sure that it is fulfilling its objectives, or that if it needs to be changed, that it's changing properly, and that we're notifying the right people, including the right stakeholders, including us little people in procurement that get it at the tail end. So those are examples of some of the things that we're doing in that vein. One of the things that I've tried to challenge my folks to do is focus on the program management community, what we call the acquisition managers. The program managers, the systems engineers, the logisticians, the cost estimators, and those guys. We follow FACT PPM for certification. We run the certification program at our agency. We run the Homeland Security Acquisition Institute. So we're focusing on that training, on that certification. And the third thing we're looking at is how do we code these folks in the personnel system so we know who they are? Because we call everybody a program manager. If you're a 343, you're a PM. Right? Am I exaggerating that?
No,
Everybody 343 is out here. I bet you're called a PM.
If you're on the CFC program, there's a VA and a
You're a
office,
PM.
you're a PM.
Exactly. So what we're trying to do is find a way to really identify these folks so that we can say, those are the guys that should be assigned to these high-level programs that need to have this kind of training, meet these certification levels. So we're really focused on bringing that about. So those are some of the quote innovations that we're working on as an organization. But in addition to that, we put in place what we call acquisition innovations in motion. This is something that kind of started to support the Unity of Effort initiative that the Secretary has been talking about. What is unity of effort? Really, unity of effort is we're going to look across the DHS spectrum, come together, and look at everything that we do and determine how do we work together to achieve our mission. Instead of just looking at what CBP does, or USCIS does, or what ICE does, maybe we bring the three of them together to see how to better use our assets and our resources to solve the problems that we need to solve. It's real simple. It's about coming together as a team and working together, sharing resources, information, knowledge within the agency, but as well as externally with other partners. So that's what unity of effort is about. And to support that, we need to be a little bit more innovative in how we approach our work, a little bit more innovative in how we engage with industry. So acquisition innovations in motion is just a series of high-level activities that we're focusing on to improve our internal business processes, as well as how we engage with industry. So we've set aside several industry engagements that are about learning from one another, about us educating industry on our business processes, but more importantly, us learning about our industry, how we can do our business better, and how their business processes work, some of their decision-making processes, what kind of information we can be providing to industry, and when, and how often, and in what form, so that you can make better informed decisions about how you're going to invest in research and development, or how you're going to engage with us on a particular acquisition. So an example of that is on February 25th, we had our strategic industry conversation. A series of panels that focused on program areas, challenges that we're trying to address in specific program areas that cut across multiple components of the agencies. So we actually had industry and government panels discussing these program areas. And from that came some good ideas, some solutions that we're now looking at, and we'll be coming back out to industry to talk a little bit more specifically about some of the thoughts that we have in that area. Just recently, about a week ago, I had an RFP, RFI industry event where we brought together about 150 folks, federal government and industry, and broke it down into a series of 4 roundtables. and we talked about, and we broke up those roundtables by subject areas, R&D, IT, major procurements, and small business, to get input from industry on the tools that we use to give you information, whether it's the RFI, the draft RFP, our acquisition planning and forecasting system, our website, all the tools that we have out there. Tell us what's working for you, what's not, what do you like, what don't you like, what else have you seen out there, what are some of the tools that our fellow agencies are using that maybe we should be using. How do you want us to engage with you? What kind of information do you want us to give you? What are we giving you that really isn't useful to you? So, but it's a dialogue. It's not the, I call it the Last Supper effect, where we stand in front of you and tell you what we're doing. It's really an engaging discussion. And I was there, we had the Undersecretary for Management, and we actually went around the rooms, and I was really impressed at the level of discussion that was actually happening. We were actually talking to one another, which is what I think industry engagement needs to be about. So those are some of the things we're doing. Under the Acquisition Innovations in Motion, I also started what I call the Procurement Innovation Lab. In the Procurement Innovation Lab, get it, pill? If procurement's ailing you, take the pill. Anyway, so but the Procurement Innovation Lab is about opening the door to a community that is procurement, but even the broader community that is acquisition. Program managers. So I've opened this up to my component acquisition executives, program managers. We're doing a series of briefings on it. Bring me whatever idea you have, and I'm going to open it up to industry too, that you think I can implement to improve the procurement process. Just bring me the idea. And we're going to take a look at it, and we're going to flesh it out, and we're probably going to let you work on it in our little lab, and our lab is really virtual. You can actually work on it. We're going to kind of look over your shoulder to make sure that we're doing things right, that we're giving the proper cover, the proper support, and when it works, you're going to get a little tag. I haven't decided what I'm going to call you, whether I'm going to call you a coach, a mentor. We're going to come up with some cute names. I don't want to do black belts, green belts, because that's what I would use. But we're going to give you like a nice little tag to show the world that we can be smart, and we can take all these tools that we have out here. We have a ton of tools, but read the far carefully. There's a ton of stuff that we can do. Very little that we can't, right? Let's see how we get smarter and get things done a little quicker, a little cheaper, and a little smarter. How do we get information quicker to industry? How do we get proposals that are meaningful back? Because I'm really sick and tired of reading back plans, right? You guys are tired of writing those big plans that don't say anything? I'm tired of reading them. How do we get meaningful proposals? How do we negotiate more effectively and get that procurement done a little quicker? Get that evaluation a little quicker? Because you know what the biggest delay in procurements when you're in the evaluation is? The needs people. Evaluators change jobs when they move to another position. Then I got to bring a new evaluator in, and they got to get retrained, and they got to learn the process. That slows everything down. So I can get through that evaluation process pretty quickly, right? I might keep that same team, which means I have more consistency, more effectiveness, right? Better debriefings, et cetera. So those are the kind of things that we're doing in the Procurement Innovation Lab. And it's not just about the procurement, it's about processes as well. So we're looking at our closeout procedures. Every agency, I don't know anybody who's caught up on closeouts. Is anybody caught up on closeouts? That's what we're doing. How do we speed up that process so we take that off the table? Get rid of those, open balances that affect your financial statements and things like that, get that pressure off. How do we speed up the review processes for acquisition plans and those kinds of things? So it's about thinking across the spectrum and finding whatever those pockets are of ideas. And again, it may not be anything new, it just might be using the tools that are already out there in a different way. So that's some of the stuff that we're doing, as well as improving our training and all those areas. Debriefing is an area where we took our training to a totally different level. We give debriefing training using our industry partners because we do role playing. And we bring industry in to tell our students how they're doing on the debriefings. It's been hugely successful. We're doing about doing that in areas like negotiations, discussions, those kinds of things. So
Thanks, Sarah. A lot of leadership that other agencies can emulate. Thanks for going through that. And another agency providing great leadership for agencies emulate is ACT-IAC. And Mark, A lot of people in the room have heard about Agile and how it's sort of a new way of buying and that the procurement system may not be friendly to it. You seem to have found a way through that. Can you talk a little bit about your innovation process and how it fits into this new mode of IT?
Sure, yeah. It's interesting to sort of try to explain, I guess, Agile acquisition. I've been in DC for about 11, 12 months now, and came from Atlanta and CDC where I worked in procurement for about 4.5 years. Agile, from what I understood at the beginning, was primarily around implementation, but I think we're moving it more towards the entire Agile, moving towards the acquisition lifecycle, making it more Agile friendly. So with that, going back before, the use of integrated project teams, not often used correctly. To do Agile really correctly, which I'll admit HHS has not done in the Buyers Club yet, and I have pretty high standards, as do some of our colleagues at USDS and ACT-IAC, which are all doing great things. At the very beginning, I know Sarai mentioned it, some others have mentioned it too, that the key to doing anything the correct way in acquisition, Agile or not, is what entrepreneurs or innovators do. As soon as they determine there's a gap, there's a problem, or there's a need to be built, solved, whatever you want to call it, that is the point. That is probably the most vulnerable point. And at that time, you need your best subject matter experts or your advisors. But what typically program does is they will draft what they believe they need, and like Sarai said, throw it over the fence, or use our assembly lines of acquisition. And when it comes to IT services, they're more complex. And if you pass it down the line in a McDonald's Taylorization approach, each time you pass it down, you're increasing your failure rate, the possibility of failure. What you should be doing is, because of 508 accessibility, because of security, because of integration, and the biggest bit is probably understanding what technology you're trying to acquire is. You really can't expect a contracting officer, even probably the top probably 10-20% of IT acquisition contracting officers, really understanding every IT issue if you drop it in their inbox and give them anywhere from 30 to 90 days to acquire something. Because a lot of their work is administrative, it's outreach, development solicitations, etc. So what you should be doing is, when you have that need, and this is where we get into sort of Agile acquisition, is bringing all those advisors to the front of the room, the front of the class, and having an initial conversation around it. And then with the end users involved, then you move in a gradual fashion. So by the time someone else has to review it, and then budget has to review it, and IT has to review security 508. By the time you get to your contracting officer, they've been working with you on market research, on understanding things. Your time to award should diminish. And really, you're going to end up with a much better project, a much better integration. And really, the thing is, it's much different than what we've always done, and it takes more work, and it runs counter to what we typically do, but it's important. And because the failure rate for IT services is so high, if we do the same thing we've always done, we're going to get the same result. We've all heard this before. The program typically is averse to dealing with those advisors until they're ready. But by the time they're ready, it's really almost too late. And procurement and the other advisors would like to become more involved earlier, but there's a barrier set up because of programs sometimes. There are a lot of groups out there that do integrated project teams well. But I think more often than not they don't, because they're just not aware of how to do it. And I will say, for end users, it does take more work, but it should take more work. The notion of awarding a contract to an IT service provider and saying come back in 6 months, that should be gone. Because, as other groups, other members of the panel will say, well, analogies I do too, that train will leave the track really quickly. And you'll spend a lot of money, you'll waste a lot of money, and by the time you get them back on the track, you're just accepting failure. And failure occurs in many forms. One of the things that occurred to me this morning or maybe yesterday as I was thinking of a new analogy, and I try it all the time, is everyone has a problem. If I imagine most of you probably drive. I probably drive once every 3 weeks because I can walk everywhere now. When you take your car to the shop and you have a problem, you don't know what the problem is. Your car is full of so many different computer chips and systems now, and it's hard to know what's really wrong with your car. You hear a noise or whatever. There are good mechanics. There are bad mechanics. Some will tell you there's all these things wrong with your car that maybe aren't. But some of the good ones will really tell you they can't really tell you what's wrong until they get inside the car and spend an hour or two to figure out what's wrong. That's sort of the same thing in terms of a lot of these IT service projects, because the government and any agency, any staff division has so many systems that have to work with one another, and you can't expect when you release an RFP and expect it back in a month, unless you give them complete access to your systems, that they can really tell you how they can solve your problem. And so you need to focus in your RFP on the objectives and the outcomes you need as clearly as you can, but also to a certain extent as broad as you can. Because the true agile IT service providers, they need to get in there and do end user interviews, because end users drive all of this. At the end of the day, if they're not satisfied, if they can't use it correctly, if they can't drive their car and operate it, that again is failure. So it's the same kind of concept. Obviously, it's not the same all the time, but a company needs to get in there and interview you and talk about things and explore things. And until we give them full access, which you really can't do with 100, 200 companies in an RFP process, we have to find a way to vet them properly. Another aspect I'll say that the Buyers Club has done is that we are trying to get away from solely text-based proposals. We're also moving, in some cases, to staged RFPs. Because asking companies, especially small businesses, to submit 30-page text proposals takes a lot of time, resources, money, effort, and it may not be worth their time. So we started asking for 8-page concept papers where we ask, explain to us your use of Agile, illustrate it for us so we can understand to see if it actually is Agile or if it is more waterfall wrapped up to look like Agile. And it's a small burden on any company for 8 pages, but companies still are trying to throw everything they can, the whole kitchen sink, into that concept paper. But what I really want to know is, tell me how you're going to get from A to Z to solve my problem at a high level so I can understand it. Your management plan, your key personnel, don't want to talk about it now. We want to focus on solving the problem, filling the need, filling that gap, the same way an entrepreneur would do when they do market research. So that's some of what we're doing. We're also trying to do more prototyping because even industry will tell you they can explain to you what the process is. They can say they have capabilities, and some can and some can't. But if they can show you what their capabilities are, and we've had at least one good use case, and we have more coming. Being able to evaluate a company based on a prototype, a mock-up, give them 2 or 3 weeks. Some people are calling it a bake-off, where they will come in with their proposal, and they will show you what they've designed on the website, show us their coding. We can actually see that it works. There is a group that I've worked with, we released an RFP this week, and they had previous failure, and this is, previous contract less than $2 million, not even a huge contract, but they had major failure across a lot of areas. And one of the simplest ones was having a dual English and Spanish website. I mean, this is simple stuff. It's not hard to find someone who can translate it into Spanish. But they couldn't do it, but yet they won the award because they said they could do it. So one of the prototypes we're asking for, among a number of different things, is to provide us with, this is basic stuff. You could take 20 hours, 40 hours to do it. An English version, a Spanish version. We're giving you a database of knowledge, convert it into analytics. Show us you can do the work that you're going to have to do for the next 2, 3, 4 years, because that will tell us whether or not you can actually provide it. In some cases, we'll pay if they're a small business because we don't want to tax them too heavily. So there's a lot of different things that we're doing from the Buyers Club. And I'll say some of this I would call agile acquisition, but I think agile acquisition in the nature of agile, we're still trying to figure out what it is. And one of the other things we're trying to do within the Buyers Club at HHS, and others are also looking at the same thing too, is it's not just about the RFP. It's about the inception of the need, like Soraya said, all the way to closeout. Admittedly, I'm not a fan of dealing with closeout, but the entire life cycle has a tremendous amount of stakeholders. There's industry externally and others externally, including Jason Miller in the room, he's a stakeholder in the process. And then there's also a lot of internal stakeholders. And every audience, whether it's the 508 accessibility folks, the security folks, everyone in between, they're stakeholders, but they need to have aligned incentives. And when you have the assembly line format and your PMAPs are structured based on your core areas, the incentives are not aligned. And so this is a real gradual cultural behavioral shift, and as anyone knows, it's really hard to break, especially in large organizations. So we're focusing where we can on areas we can make a dent. There's a lot of work to go around. There's plenty of it. There's one thing that I do want to say, as everyone at this panel really wants to talk about what others have said before, and I want to mention something that Mary Davey sort of alluded to in terms of FITARA. GSA has a great system that they stood up called the IT Spend Tracker. This was before FITARA, and a lot of groups are now creating these spend trackers as they evaluate to get CAO approval. I love the idea of the spend tracker, but not for the way it was created. There's two things I like about it, or that it could be. One is that as you're gathering this information and you're approving, you can then collect that information and create analysis around it to share with your organization, to share with the federal government. But because I think at least 50 to 60% of the IT services that we create, this common spend, to some degree within IT service category, it's the same stuff we're doing over and over again. It's development of websites, databases, knowledge management portals, etc. And we're not sharing that knowledge. We're not sharing lessons learned, potential pitfalls. When I work in a procurement shop, the reporting structure, which I think is similar to a lot of agencies, is designed to report up. There's really little reporting that reports back down. And when you're a contract specialist or an officer or a team lead, and you want to improve your organization or division, you have to go in manually a lot of times and take so much time to figure out how to really improve your group. And as a contract specialist or officer, I didn't know what was going on 2 doors down. We could both be doing the same thing. We could have collaborated. There should be tags to where at GSA or DHS or something, if you're both working on a similar plan, you can collaborate. And when you collaborate in terms of strategic sourcing, you're likely to save money, you're likely to learn more, you're likely to minimize the amount of resources you spend on market research. So we're not doing ourselves a service as a Fortune 1 company. And even across agencies or within agencies, we're just not doing well. So the GSA IT Spend Tracker, was the first, I think, of its kind that I learned about. And I think it's got a tremendous amount of forward progress, and I'd like to see HHS adopt a similar model. There's a lot of ways to really think about what the needs are, not just of industry, of contract specialists, of all the stakeholders. There's so many tools out there, the technology is there. We just need to actually grab a hold of it and make it work for us so we can improve. There's probably more that I can say about it, but I tend to get long-winded, so I'm going to stop at this point and turn it back to you. Any questions?
Thanks, Mark. I think now, do we want to go to questions for a minute or two, or do we want to go right to the audience for table discussions?
Yeah, we're going to need to go to table discussions. Maybe time for one question.
One question right here.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Mary Ann Wangeman from University of Virginia. Thank you for your comments today. So last night I spent some time putting together a FITARA class for ACT-IAC Academy because I am a party animal. And my question is, from your perspectives, and I realize we have a lot of diverse perspectives on the panel, how is FITARA going to impact the contracting community?
So a couple of comments. So in DHS, FITARA is not like a shock to the system because we've actually had an improvement process for our CIO at 2.5 million or above. So the only thing that's changed for us is we actually already have a process in place for the CIO to review and approve all acquisitions. Where I think it impacts the acquisition community, if you haven't done it, it might be a little bit of a shock to the system. What I hope it does, though, is it helps us better understand the importance of the role of the CIO. I've always gotten it, and I'm not sure that everybody gets it, that almost in every single program, in everything we buy, there's a thread of IT in it anymore. IT is one of those lines of business, like us, that you can't live without anymore. They are a part of everything that you do. So I hope that what it does is it wakes up the contract specialist, the contracting officer, to partner a little bit better with the CIO, to work with the programs and say, how do we better support you? One of the things that Luke McCormick and our CIO at DHS and I are doing is we are partnering. First of all, Luke and I have known each other for many years, but even as soon as he found out that I had the job, he immediately picked up the phone and started telling me what he wanted me to do. It's easy. And I started telling him what I wanted to do. But we really started talking about how do we form this partnership, because we both get it. He needs me and I need him, and we get that. And we understand that together we can support a program much better, and we can bring in the other lines of business, the security guys, the finance guys, et cetera. So, and that's what unity of effort is about, by the way, at DHS. So I think FTARA for us is not a shock to the system. It just strengthens our position. It enables us to get out there a little bit more, but I think that's what it's going to do. It's going to strengthen that partnership and emphasize that line of business a little bit more. People don't always understand everything we do as a threat of IT anymore, a threat of technology.
Thanks, Sarah. Great thoughts that could apply to any age. Any other quick thoughts on the term before we go to the next page? And just a preview, coming attractions, ACT-IAC is taking on the TAR initiative. You'll hear more about this in the coming weeks. So stay tuned for those of you that are interested in this. It'll be a terrific event. You want to give the ground rules on the next part?
Yeah, I think we'll go ahead and
All right. So we're a lot smarter now than we were 45 minutes ago. Please join me in thanking our. And now it's your turn. So I'm going to let Steve take over.
All right, so as I mentioned at the outset this morning, we now turn to discussions at the tables. And so the way that this is set up is going to be sort of a lightning fast round, in part because we're behind.
Right.
But each table has a table host who can assign to the table. What you need to do is assign somebody at the table to be a scribe, if you do not already, somebody has not already been assigned as a scribe. There should be on the table a set of questions, 2 questions per table. They're not all the same questions at every table, but every table has 2 questions to choose from this panel. And what we'd like to do is have you choose one of those questions and spend about 15 to 20 minutes talking about it. And at the end, we're going to do a little bit of sharing out for 5 or 10 minutes. And the objective is to come back to the room with the 3 most salient or actionable points from the discussion, starting now. Hopefully everybody we had a productive discussion and we got some great ideas written down from the scribes. All right, everybody. Good discussion. I can hear it going on. So here's what we're going to do next. We're going to hand the microphone off here to Luke Harris-Desi, who helped put this thing together. And we're going to pick a couple of tables to share out your ideas. Each table that Luke comes to, ask somebody to stand up and share the 3 salient points coming from that table. And what I'm going to remind the scribes, very important role that each of the scribes have, please make sure that the ideas that you have are written down legibly and comprehensively, and turn them in at the registration desk when we go to break here in about 5 to 10 minutes, because we are going to try and harvest those ideas from everybody. Luke, take it away.
Steve asked for 3 ideas. If we can get 1 from a table.
We'll give you.
Gil's ready.
We actually took a 3-lever approach. We said, first of all, to go back to the basics of the process. And it's not just the government process. I think there's a lack of information for most government folks on what industry goes through from the very beginning, through a bid, no bid, all the way red tape. I mean, it's really unbelievable. And the costs go up and up. So it's going back to the basics and knowledge and information for all stakeholders, PMs, COs, industry, government, everybody. That, coupled with open, interactive communication. And I hear over and over, oh, I'm afraid of protest, I'm afraid of protest. And as Rob said, you know, when you develop the file, you're giving it anyway. So what are you afraid of? You've already made your contract file. All you're doing is modifying that to give through a protest. I'm not sure what that fear is. And the third lever, in addition to the basics, the open interactive communication is a commitment to a shared goal for everybody as a team.
Shared goal in terms of the acquisition?
Where you're going, where you are, every step of the way. Continue the shared goal through the process.
Thank you very much. I'm going to click on the table. Yes, could you raise your hand?
Sure. We also picked question number 1, right? What is the one thing you would change to enable the acquisition process to better support innovation in government? And some themes, I guess. We thought about the roles between the program manager and the acquisition and procurement folks. And as the panel was discussing, clarification of those roles would help. But really, what we talked about is getting the dialogue started earlier in the cycle. And this is just my personal comment. I see a vicious cycle of the PMs thinking what they knowing what they want, and then just throwing it over the fence to acquisition procurement, saying just go buy it, as opposed to how do you actually get the acquisition folks to help them come up with additional choices or options for that. And then our kind of bottom line is really more of a question, as more than an idea, is how can you encourage innovation with a financial means? So when they get started in a lab with a Skunk Works type project, and can the company or vendor be rewarded for performance and grow small to bigger things? Anything else? That's what we have.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to have one more table respond, and I might ask some questions. So we're hearing back to basics, roles, dialogue early. So where I'm going to go with this is, these are good ideas. We all seem to know they're good ideas. Would you guys? Okay. Let's think about what blocks these good ideas from being done. I'm going to come back to that. You don't have to address that. You tell me what your top 1 or 2 or 3 ideas are. But for the whole room, we've got a few minutes before we have to move it into the next part of the agenda. Let's ask, or maybe try to answer, what keeps good ideas from being done that we know are the right things to do? Who would like to?
Protests. Industry protests.
Oh, you're going right to that question.
No, so we didn't have that question.
Which one did you, okay, the first question? And what you want to say what you're answering for?
So we went with the first topic about best practices. And one of our recommendations was to increase transparency around the contracting vehicle and the evaluation criteria early on in the process. Because apparently there's been some pushback where COs will put out requirements, but then they won't share what the vehicle is. And so you're running around trying to figure out, well, which vehicle should I propose under? Can I even propose? So, or you contact them and they don't want to tell you. So to have that disclosed along with the NAICS code as early as possible, even if you're forecasting your requirements and you already know, to put that out there. And the second one was to promote conversations early on in the process. I think this is a recurring theme. And one of our suggestions was to move forward with drafts of the requirements, to send that out to industry, not just doing a sources sought, but to literally put out a draft of what you think you want and allow industry to give you feedback on how to craft that, to put it into your RFP, and then follow up on those recommended edits, one-on-ones with the industry to ask them about why they may have recommended those changes to your requirements, both before and after you post the RFP, as opposed to just doing a general Q&A where you shoot out an email and you post a public response, but to follow up individually with the vendors who are interested in proposing.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. I just wanted to add, we discussed early feedback to industry who are interested so that they could self-select out, so that the government in those one-on-ones isn't dealing with a huge host of contractors.
Thank you. So asking the question back to them, why did you propose that, gives you more information about the thinking behind the written word. Okay, so thank you, three tables. We have a few minutes, especially for the federal officials in here, contractor, program personnel. These are all the right ideas. You're doing them. I mean, I think we're doing more of these. But what's the hurdle to be clear? What is it? Is it coverage from management? Is it time? You have too many things. Too many heads are nodding. Not enough time.
I think it's a couple of things. I think we are challenged with time. Program offices bring requirements to us, and they want them yesterday or need them yesterday, or if their services are expiring in 60 days.
They think that's enough time.
And they think it's enough time. They think that a lot of times we're the hurdle. And as the gentleman said over there, they come with the solution instead of what are your requirements to meet the mission and seeing what's out there. They already know that they want a Cisco product, an EMC product, a Motorola product, and instead of telling me and me being able to be full and open and competitive, they try to write sole sources, which just, that adds more time. Makes it take longer. And then it's, so it's the challenge of doing and managing the risk of change, the risk of going and doing something totally innovative and different. They want us to be innovative. They want you to think outside the box, but don't think.
Do it safely.
Do it safely, or don't. If it's not in my box, don't worry about it. And then the other thing I would say is frivolous protests. There's no accountability for any company to submit a protest, especially incumbents. That's 6 more months of work for. It's 6 more months, whether it's a good protest or not.
Okay, thank you. Those are some good real-world problems that a contracts officer faces to implementing basic practices. Who's a program person in here? I'm going to pick on a program person. Mission, function, area. Oh, hands are down. The question was to one of you is, so what's the risk you're trying to manage by bringing the very specific requirements to the CO that way? We talked about this some at our table. Anybody want to tackle that? It's okay if you don't. What's the risk the program's trying to manage by bringing very specific requirements to the CO? Everyone's trying to manage risk. Everyone's trying to get a job done, to get it done quickly, under too few resources, too little time, not get in trouble. There's a whole lot of risk management going on here, and things take long and go slow and don't get good results.
I'm not a program manager for the government, but I think sometimes the risk that they might face is that risk of change, the transition risk. Especially if it's a mission critical type of thing, to transition people, cycle them through, that's a big risk.
One of the guys at the table I was facilitating on the industry side, and I've been on both, but in the industry when I worked on proposals, I counted the number of times that the word shall appeared in the solicitation, and it's a lot. It can be hundreds. And that tells me that someone's trying to manage some risk. Someone's trying to be very specific and say exactly what they need, and if they get it, great. If they don't get it, the risk transfers to the contractor. We told you you had to do 53 things. It's your responsibility now. So if that's how our system is set up to work, that's how it's set up to work. That might not be getting us the kind of quality results we want from end to end as industry and government partners. Anything else?
Not on my end, but next on the agenda is a break, which I think a lot of people have been looking forward to. So let's take about 10 minutes. We're going to come back here at 10:25, and continue the program at that point. Thank you. All right, everybody, let's get started. So, while we've got the panel two participants up here on the stage and getting them prepared, we have a special presentation here. Every year for, now this is the third year, ACT-IAC as part of this Mythbusters forum has also presented an award called the Excellence in Government Industry Engagement Award. And this year, to present some information about the award and to present the award to our winner is Joni Newhart from the Office of Federal Procurement Policy.
Good morning, everyone. I always have to put the microphone lower for me. Very good challenge. So, when we first put out the first myth-busting memo, ACT-IAC came to us and said, "We love this," which of course they would, being up government and industry. And they said, "How can we help?" And we love to work with ACT-IAC on just about everything. And so we came up with the idea that we needed to do a survey, even at that point, to decide how we're doing, because as everybody said, you put out a memo and then, you know, what happens? And then from that, sort of, the Act 360 was generated, the memo that just came out a few months ago. So we've been partnering with ACT-IAC all along. And one of the things that they suggested that we love the idea of was an award, because whenever you shine a light on something, then it gets more attention. So this year, it was a very tough competition, a very good competition. And I'm very pleased to say that the award this year is going to go to the VA Acquisition Academy for its Market Intelligence course offering. And the course is very interesting. It has 25% of the seats are set aside for industry, so it's an automatic way to get industry and government in the same room. And they're talking beyond market research to market intelligence, really satisfying the customer's needs. And I think this is a fantastic idea, focusing on partnering, and then the participants develop a market intelligence plan when they go back to the office so that they can actually put these ideas into play on real procurement. So what could be better than that? So I want to invite two people, Maya Moxley and Greg Giddens, up to the stage to receive the award for the VA Acquisition Academy.
This is her work.
Thank you. Really good work. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thanks for being here, and beyond Mythbusters, the journey continues. You just heard the last panel. I will tell you, this one's better. These are the people who are really leading the charge on making sure that the kind of government industry engagement that we all want is taking place. In listening to the last panel, I kind of felt like it was like a GAO report, that progress has been made, but a lot of challenges remain and improvements can be made. And having sat on both sides for many years, about 3 or 4 years ago, I thought in terms of government industry collaboration, communication, we'd reached an all-time low. And I think people are starting to turn it around. And I think we have a great panel to talk about what they're doing on major acquisitions. And let me introduce the panel very quickly. On my far left is Brian Goodger of NIH. For those who don't know Brian, he's the Associate Director of the Office of Logistics and Acquisition Operations. Kevin Gallo of GSA, for those who don't know, Kevin leads the Network Services Program, multi-billion-dollar telecommunications program for GSA. Alex Rouse, who everybody here should know what HCATS is. Everybody knows what HCATS is, I hope. You do not. You do. You do, good. And one does. And Harrison Smith, who is a late addition and a great addition to our panel. If you don't know Harrison, he is the industry liaison for all of DHS, works very closely with Soraya in implementing many of the things that she talked about. So with that, let me start with Alex and let her talk, and we're going to talk for about 4 or 5 minutes about what you all are doing, and then we're going to talk amongst us. let the audience participate, and then go to the table discussions. Alex?
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, well, I'm Alexandra Rouse. Alex, I'm the program manager for HCATS, which is the Human Capital and Training Solutions services that we're building in partnership with OPM. Hi, Rich, my counterpart. This is to address complex human capital and training solutions that the government often requires. It's part of the category management initiative that OMB, lots of acronyms, is building, where GSA is responsible for the acquisition side and OPM is providing the policy guidance to this solution.
Thanks. Kevin?
Okay. Enterprise Infrastructure Solutions, or EIS. One of the programs that Mary Davey had referenced in her remarks in the earlier panel. So, if you're familiar with EIS. Okay. Got a number of hands here, despite our best attempt to keep it quiet. Word is getting out about EIS. It'll effectively be the federal government's contracts for telecommunications. Its successor to networks and GSA's local contracts, such as Switch 3. Collectively, it's around $2 billion in business today, steadily growing every year, and all that is eventually going to be transitioning to EIS. Also the centerpiece of the Network Services 2020 strategy, or NS 2020 strategy. So it needs to be very broad and flexible. If you think about enterprise telecommunications, there's not that one-size-fits-all solution. And it also needs to be able to accommodate changing technology, rapidly advancing technology. So with the EIS acquisition, what are we doing that's really kind of noteworthy and innovative here in how we're conducting this acquisition? For one thing, we're using an Interact site. So we have an up and active Interact site. But I almost hesitate now to say that that's innovative. This is interact.gsa.gov, because it's almost becoming standard operating procedure for the major GSA acquisitions. We had used its predecessor, BetterBuy, with the wireless FSSI acquisition. Interact, of course, was very successfully used by the OASIS program. There's also an Interact site for the Alliant 2 acquisition that's going on right now. And we're going to be using it for our future, upcoming satellite communications acquisition. So even though I hesitate to say it's innovative, we certainly do have that. It's a big part of communications and outreach. If you are interested in following the acquisition there, you go to that site. Make sure you also click on the button there for the Stay Informed link. That way you'll know when there's updates. We've been putting additional material out there, at least weekly, if not more often, on that. We also have a mailbox there for the communications that you don't want to be public, so a lot of it is in that form too. So what is really kind of noteworthy, though, I would say, is the diversity of methods we're using for outreach and collaboration there. So ACT-IAC has an NS 2020 working group. It's been very active, weekly meetings there and other meetings that are even with a larger group, collaborative meetings there. So that's been a big part of helping inform our strategy efforts and then the early part of the actual EIS acquisition there, and provided comments to some of our RFIs. We've met with the ACT-IAC working group there. We've used traditional methods like federal BizOps, posted several RFIs, complete draft RFP in the end of February here this year. Well, side note, I think it's a little bit of a best practice there to release a draft RFP for comments for any large and complex acquisition there. So quite a few great feedback here from the RFI process here, with hundreds of responses for the actual draft RFP. We're in the midst of a series of industry days there. Mentioned the Interact site, have a website, the EIS website, Network Services 2020 strategy website. Also been a number of blogs. This is GSA, ITS's Great Government Through Technology blogs there. Been conducting one-on-one meetings with industry. Over the course of the acquisition, we have met with over 50 different companies here. And just go, like going back, think back to Mr. Burton's earlier remarks there in the keynote. These one-on-one meetings have been particularly valuable, because that's when you get that two-way dialogue, and you're really listening there. So quite a few one-on-one meetings there. And then, of course, speaking engagements, listening to comments, answering questions at conferences. Just earlier this week, Fred Haynes, PM, and Debbie Wren, our lead for transition, we're speaking at the Federal IT Acquisition Summit. So quite a few appearances like that. So really, it's a very broad method for collaboration, interaction, outreach there. Something else that's a little bit noteworthy is there was a lot of collaboration even before the start of the acquisition. And this regards the NS 2020 strategy effort. Because NS 2020 wasn't just designed to be the strategy for the follow-on to networks. If you look at today, we, in network services programs, have a portfolio of contracts for telecom and related IT infrastructure. And so we're going to be moving in the future to a portfolio of contracts. We look at those portfolio of contracts in the context of GSA's overall IT contracts there. So we need to look at the whole picture, not just a one-on-one replacement there for networks. We're also changing the way we're organized in order to better serve our customers and gain efficiencies. We're modernizing our back office systems. So we're looking at all of this holistically, and we've been working with our government customers here as we do this. We had a couple executive roundtables, one-on-one meetings. We organized an NS 2020 Interagency Advisory Panel, and also working with industry there. In addition to one-on-ones, we're working with ACT-IAC Networks and Telecommunications SIG early on, and then that led to the formation of the NS 2020 working group there. Something else noteworthy, and I dare to say it might be innovative, is the Program Management Office and the Acquisition Office are working as one integrated, coordinated team with the EIS acquisition. So that's essential, of course. Just last other thing significant worth mentioning is we tackled what was arguably the toughest item head-on, and that was our requirements for post-award operations and business support systems, is a really important part of the telecommunications contract. So the NS 2020 working group had a subcommittee focused just on that item. We released a comprehensive RFI last year. It happened to be on Halloween, so there's no symbolism intended with that. We've met and are continuing to meet with interested companies on a one-on-one basis on that subject specifically to really get that deep dive conversation there on business support systems. And as a result of all of this, we've been able to improve EIS's data dictionary and procedural and reduce the complexity. For example, we've actually reduced the data dictionary fields like 40% and everything. So that's all been very effective. So the EIS acquisition, more to follow. Next industry day, June 30th here at GSA headquarters. Anticipate the RFP coming in September. We're also developing an update to the overall NS 2020 strategy, and then progressing with other acquisitions in the NS 2020 portfolio. Most notably CS3, the follow-on to CS2, one of our SATCOM acquisitions is coming. We just had the industry day for that.
Thanks, Kevin. Harrison?
Thank you. So part of my work at DHS before I became industry liaison was I was the division director for the Enterprise Acquisition Division, which handled 25 of our strategic sourcing bids, all of which I think fall under the major efforts. The total combined ceiling was $68 million. So one of the things that we have done in our work with the AD in terms of reaching out to industry is helping folks understand industry, understand as much as possible more about the procurement and our strategy further left. When I say further left, I simply mean earlier along the acquisition timeline. Clearly, one of the balances that we've had to strike is the earlier on we talk to you about these things, the more amorphous the information is, the more likely it is to change. And that's been one of the areas of focus that we've had. We may be communicating to you about PAX-2, for instance, that is a current vehicle that's out, proposals already come in, but we tried to communicate very early on that we were going to consolidate the 4 lanes, or the 4 different types of contracts into 2. And we tried to tell you why, what was our thought process, the reasons we made our decision. And we find that in the approach of providing you with that information, not only what the decision is, but also the rationale behind it, you may not necessarily appreciate or particularly like the answer. It's just like a debriefing. You may not particularly appreciate it or like it, but at least you understand the rationale behind it and make an informed decision. And that's really one of the phrases that works throughout, whether it be in regards to specific large procurements or just in general about this strategy. Some of you probably heard from Soraya earlier today about her work with Luke McCormick, the CIO. She and Luke are working together to help industry understand the overarching IT strategy of where we're going. How are we going to address issues like cloud? How are we going to address issues like data center consolidation? How are we going to work on these things so that you have enough information to make an informed decision? Because if you don't, that's costly. That's wasted time, it's wasted resources. You have to convince yourself, you have to convince your boss, say at a gate review or whatever it may or may not be. I need more time, I need more resources, I need more money to assign to this effort. Well, what have you heard back from the government? What has Harrison told you about this? What has Soraya and Luke told you about this? They haven't told me anything yet. There's a cost associated with that, and then at some point, if we don't do a good enough job with that, you go away. And that's not good for anybody. We want to provide you with enough information so that you can say, this is in my wheelhouse. I can do this. Or I can identify a team member that's going to help this be in my wheelhouse. Or frankly, this isn't it. So that you'll find another area to focus on. Because at the end of the day, if we do that well enough, if we allow you to make informed decisions, we're going to have more mature technologies and solutions at better prices and more targeted proposals. Meaning that you have a greater P-win or whatever the metric is that you use. We have proposals that are frankly better written and more tailored to our needs. And this is a win-win-win-win for everybody. These are the sets of information that we try to provide. We also try to do the same thing not only earlier in timeline, but also at the tail end. So I also mentioned her approach to the training courses for contract review. Especially for these large procurements. At the end of them, we understand that you spend an awful lot of money generating a proposal. Not only that, but the BD work, the teaming work, all of these things. And we want to provide you with enough information so that you can, frankly, generate a better proposal next time. So that you can understand where there may have been a gap. And you said yellow when we heard albatross, and that's not good for anybody. We want to tell you that. We want to give you an idea of how close you were, frankly. Was I close? I'll give a specific example. This is all publicly available information. I mentioned PAX 2, the predecessor of PAX 1, which is a non-IT services $1.5 billion set aside for SDVOSB concerns. We got 666 proposals from 216 vendors. We wanted to make sure that all the businesses, but especially because they were SDVOSBs, understood where they fell. We told them specifically in the debriefing, I think the shortest of which was 13 pages incidentally. We told them, you were here in terms of technical, you were here in terms of price. There were X number of people who were rated better and priced cheaper than you, who also did not get an award. Now that was not to say this really wasn't a good proposal, but it was to help industry understand how close they were to that threshold. You know, what they needed to go back and improve it going forward. And those are really the areas we try to address it in multiple areas. I think certainly the work that GSA is doing in terms of constantly updating and have a multi-tiered approach. If we simply provide a data dump to you, whether it be an industry day where hopefully this does not happen, somebody just reads a deck of slides and points out the RFP, that information is important. We can provide that to you on a website, but that can't be the only way that we do it. You've got to have the ability to have the one-on-one conversations. You have to have, as much as possible, industry have visibility into what your concerns are, what your challenges are, and what you're trying to do to fix them. And lastly, we need to listen to you. We need to reach out to you, whether it be in regards to a particular procurement or an overarching strategy, say, hey, what do you think? This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to do this at DHS with a reverse industry day, where quite often you get 3 or 4 or 5 of the government folks up here talking to a room of primarily industry folks. Why don't we turn that around? Why don't we have a room full of industry, room full of government, listening to the areas that we may not necessarily understand from a government standpoint? It would be great, DHS, GSA, federal government, if you understood that if we don't see it, if we're not aware of a requirement before the solicitation comes out, we will not bid on it, period. If we don't know who the incumbent is on a recompete, 12 months more or out, we will not bid on it, period. These are the types of conversations that we need to have, and we're only going to do that if we create a relationship and an environment where you can talk to us and be as transparent as possible, just as much as we can talk to you.
Okay, so I'm Brian Goodger, Department of Health and Human Services, National Institutes of Health. I call my wife an internet goddess. She calls me a slow-witted man with a typewriter. Only in government would they put me in charge of the second largest IT contracting company. Who's heard of NITAC? The National Institutes of Health Information Technology Acquisition Assessment Center. Last year did $4.3 billion with B dollars. This year we're trying to do $5 billion. So the NITAC group reports to me, as does a traditional contract shop. My contract shop does most contract shops do in NIH, which is by research and development services, but I also do a lot of in-house contract service contracts, station supports, and flight acquisition, and NIH.
Could you fix the mic so you're talking into it? I can
Absolutely.
hear your mouth, but I can't make out the
Sure.
words.
Is that better? Can I use this one? I've got both.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I
Thank
think I can get it.
Thank you. Okay, so some of the opportunities I have available to me here in the near future. Again, I'm in the business of increasing competition. Competition makes the quality of the product or service we buy go up and the price go down. So we have a contract closeout services RFP coming out quickly. NIH has over 9,000 contractors, which means we have at least over 9,000 contracts, many of which need help closing out. We also have an NIH-wide business professional support services RFP that is synonymous with anything that is not in-house scientific service support. So if you are in the business or administrative line of a COR, if you're redoing your office, you have a reorg, if you're doing SharePoint, if you just need help for your CORs, we have that RFP coming out quickly. I also have my counterpart office across the street, Office of Acquisition and Management Policy, otherwise known as OAM, has a BPA, a blanket purchase agreement. Website is there, many opportunities there. And if I can embarrass my counterpart, she is in the room. Her name is Glennis Fisher. Glennis, raise your hand. Thank you. Glennis is over there. Top-notch professional. We have something actually quite innovative in my office, which is ironic because I find NIH should be a little risk averse. We are doing a prize or challenge, which is a non-FAR-based contract. So not a cooperative agreement, definitely not a grant. It is a challenge or prize under the Competes Act, and you see the reasons here why it's so interesting and so specialized. Vendor expos. We're big on vendor expos. FAR encourages someone like myself to meet with industry periodically, specifically before a solicitation is released. All you've got to do is call my name in the global system if you have access to that, or phone number, email here. I'll show at the end of my slides. You're welcome to come to meet with me and my team to go over what new requirements we have coming out. We have on-site and off-site trainings for program and contracting staff, for customers, executives, and group one-on-ones. We have a symposium with our AMC, Acquisition Management Committee, which are the 10 contracting officers, the chief contracting officers in NIH. NIH is unique. It's got 18,000 employees, 27 institutes or centers, but we have 10 contract shops, 425 1102s. And they meet periodically in something called the AMC, Acquisition Management Committee. Then we've got fact sheets and infographics coming out. So as I mentioned before, I'm not the most IT savvy. I still pay my bills with a stamp in a blue box. My goal in life is to become the Postmaster General. But I hire young people who know IT. And these are some of the things they tell me that we're going to be doing here in the near future. So social media, mobile-friendly web development, video training, new hire orientation, advertisement on campus, and marketing analytics. But one of the biggest problems with NIH is it's very decentralized. And I'm unfortunately in a very centralized office. So I also don't sit on campus. So for me to get in front of my customer takes a Herculean effort, much harder than you would think. Likewise, it's equally as tough to get in front of industry. So see, these are some of the things we're going to do to try to reach out to industry and make sure we have an open dialogue. There's my contact information. Again, please feel free to reach out to me, send me an email, we can talk. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Brian. Hearing from all these great leaders, all the great things that they're doing, you might ask, okay, so where's the problem? And I think we do still have a lot of room for improvement, and I do appreciate the comments by everyone here. And I think we're here to really help make this better. And what are the best practices? What are the barriers? What makes a good industry day? And I get asked that question often by people on the government side. What is a good industry day? And I think we'd like to hear from you all. What are the barriers? Brian just said it's hard to meet with industry. I'm not sure why that is. For those of you who deal with other agencies have not used Interact. I think Interact is a best practice. It's not, it's one tool in the toolbox, but I would suggest that all agencies look at that. So I guess I'd like to open up to questions from the crowd, and really the questions are around what are the barriers, what are the things that you see that are stopping the government agencies that you deal with, or from the government in the room? What are other things that could be done? What are the best practices? What makes a good industry day? And even as you look at dealing with government, as Kevin talked about, they've done a great job in dealing with the industry on the Network Services EIS program. They've got a lot of questions in. And I guess a question maybe for Kevin and for the audience is, when the government receives a lot of questions, should they answer those questions first, or would you all prefer they just go straight to a final RFP?
Jim, can I comment first?
Sure.
We just had a pre-solicitation meeting. We had it in our GSA auditorium, which, if you've been there, is kind of small. And we got a lot of feedback from industry. They really wanted to participate. So we opened it up, and we also conducted a virtual pre-solicitation meeting. With our solution, we heard a lot from industry about not getting enough information in the past, or they didn't necessarily feel like that they were heard. With the HCAT solution, what we've done is that we've been very diligent with communicating how we're looking at the solution, how we're handling the strategies. We do take advantage of Interact, which we find to be very helpful and innovative in our communication. We've gotten a lot of feedback from industry there. We've posted draft RFPs where we've begged for comment, and we've gotten very robust comment from industry on that. We've taken all of our comments with what we got from industry along with their response. We've posted it on GSA Interact under our page so everyone can see what we've done, how we're listening, and we were very careful with our responses, not to say we're taking it under advisement or thank you for your response, or just kind of answers that yes, we acknowledge that we received something from you, but kind of shuts industry down. We did not want to take that approach. What we did, we tried to address as much as we could. This is, we looked at your comment, we're taking it under consideration, please refer to the future RFP, or we don't agree with where you're coming from, we're taking this approach, or we tried to give more meaningful responses so people really understood that we were hearing you and we were taking it seriously. We wanted to make sure that that messaging comes across in everything that we do. We have an open question period where we're taking questions from industry up until the day we release the RFP. We did ask, however, that more robust comments come in sooner so we could spend more appropriate time in deliberating what the feedback was. And honestly, at least from our end, it's been very, very successful. We've been very happy with the responses that we've gotten. We haven't had a lot of negative feedback. I'm hoping that you all have found that successful too. It's just a question of really acknowledging the comments that have come back from industry. That has been very important to us, and I think it's been successful from our perspective so far.
Well, thanks, Alex. Again, want to open it up, but I also want to offer to the panel one more time if they want to talk about anything else. I will say some of the best practices I've heard is Interact, one-on-ones, just seeing industry liaisons, and we have at least two of them I know in the room, that Harrison and Melissa, who represents GSA. I mean, having that kind of person who can look across the department or agency and say, where are you not doing best practices in communication? And by the way, when you're doing these large-scale acquisitions, I've always believed that not only should you have an acquisition plan before you start, you should have a communications plan that tells the industry up front, here's how we intend to conduct open engagement throughout the life cycle of the acquisition. And I believe, and I'll just add one more thing here, and I was participating in the early on debriefings trainings at DHS, and what I told them, first of all, debriefings are about good manners. And really they're about treating people the way they want to be treated. And as Harrison said, people who spend the time and money, they deserve to be treated well and to be able to get respect for what they did and to be able to get good feedback, as well as for the government to show them that they've done the job well and there's no use in protesting. And I think that, as Greg Giddens talked about, a cultural change, where really the people in the government and the people on the industry side have to be part of this. How do we engage in a polite way that really helps and gets to the goals of a better acquisition? The last thing I would say is engaging with industry associations. We're here today as part of ACT-IAC. For those who all don't know ACT-IAC that well, we were created for one purpose. It's not to represent our membership like other associations. It is to come together and provide a forum where government and industry can work together to make government work better, particularly in the areas of technology. Before we turn it over to the audience, any other comments from the distinguished panel? Harris?
I just want to make one comment to the audience. One of the things that I've heard several times in regards to solicitations and putting out draft announcements and draft RFPs is that you'll identify, you being industry, will identify an area or question that is important to you, either because it identifies something that you are especially good at, or it identifies a gap that you think hasn't been filled yet, and you won't ask the question. And the reason that you won't ask the question, so I've heard, is because it shows your hand, or perhaps divulges some of the secret sauce of your approach. And I see a couple folks nodding, and I'm not going to point them out. But the difficulty that we have with that, I understand how that's a concern, and I understand how you want to put your best foot forward, and frankly, you don't want to give up your competitive advantage to someone else. But at the same time, if one of the sets of conversations is that you would like us, government, to talk to you and identify issues up front, you have to do a respectful thing and do the same thing to us. If you don't want to ask it publicly, I think there's a lot of areas where you can have contact an industry liaison. Margaret Strain, the OPO industry liaison, is also in there. You can contact some of us one-on-one or in other forms where it doesn't necessarily have to be a question that's going to be asked publicly. You have email inboxes and those types of things. So I would really recommend and frankly, respectfully ask that if you identify an issue, if you identify a concern, and you don't want your name to be attached to it, we get that, we understand that. But please come to us, find a way to come to us and say, hey, I really think you're going to go sideways on this procurement, it's going to cause you some problems, here's why. Please don't mention my name. We understand that, we get that very often. We can sanitize things and find out a way to do it the right way. So that would just one point I want to make. Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Harrison. Can we open up to the audience? Chris Hammond.
So there are a bunch of different methods that they're doing for increasing collaboration. It seems like a lot of it's based on the cultural environment they're in. Is there any one particular leader in the organization that's encouraging it or fostering it, that that's the kind of way that we're going to be doing it for each of the panelists?
Is there one particular leader, or, I mean, I assume all of you all are believers.
But I mean above, those.
Above you, any?
I was going to say, within Federal Acquisition Service, Jeff Kosis, our senior procurement, is very passionate about maintaining an open dialogue with industry, getting the feedback, finding out what the roadblocks are that government has with conducting business, getting lessons learned with industry, best practices. He encourages us to have face-to-face. In HCATS, we didn't necessarily do that because our timeline didn't allow it, but he is a strong proponent of one-on-one meetings with industry, soliciting feedback through white papers or just general information that industry wants to share. He encourages that on many acquisition vehicles, having been project manager for him and other programs. We usually try to take that to heart, make sure that we just have that dialogue with industry, share what we're feeding, sharing draft RFPs, collecting feedback, asking what do you think is going to work, what don't you think is going to work, just maintaining the dialogue. I mean, and it's been successful even with HCATS. If you look at the original RFP draft that we had written, and then with all the comments and feedback that we've gotten from industry, we have something that looks very, very different today, and it's a lot better. It's a lot better. We live in a vacuum, and Jeff is making sure that he has the contracting officers get out there, talk to industry, pick up the phone. What did you mean by this? Explain more. And we do encourage this kind of feedback from industry, whether you reach out directly to the project manager, the CEO, contracting officer, excuse me. We want to have that dialogue, and he's really driving FAS in that direction.
Brian, want to answer?
It's a topic that's constantly discussed in my organization. If you want names in terms of people to reach out to, there's a woman in the Department of Health and Human Services. She's the SAD bus, which is not something that happens to you when you miss the bus. Small Disadvantaged Business Utilization Specialist. We have all these ridiculous acronyms in government. Her name is Teresa Lewis, very reciprocal, we'll get right back to you. And she has someone from her staff that sits at NIH with us. His name is Jonathan Ferguson. They constantly meet with industry.
And I would say, in answer to your question, Chris, about who is it at the top who really fosters that culture of collaboration within GSA, Jeff Kosis has always done that, Mary Davey and her entire staff. Soraya has been huge on that. There are other places where I see organizations more dominated by general counsels, IGs, where they try to shut the door on this. And it takes people like Jeff and Mary and Soraya and Brian, people who have the procurement or acquisition courage, like you do, Chris, to understand the best way to do this is to actually talk to industry and talk in a very open, collaborative way. Melissa?
Yeah, Jim, if I could just add to answering Chris's question. Yes, Chris, it is Jeff, and I can tell you, my boss, he's very concerned about the inconsistency for GSA. There's some organizations who do a very good job at industry day events. Like
Yeah, they're both on stage.
Yeah, you guys are terrific. And I was there on the virtual presentation of that, and the next day I told Jeff, I said, I'm just floored by what they did. You explained all the players. You talked about the structure of HCATs, the purpose, the goals. You spent a tremendous amount of time on the evaluation process and the methodologies. Now, a couple of weeks before that, Jeff and I went to an industry day event, and it was the complete opposite. I mean, they were told, industry was told, this will not be recorded, this is who I am, this person, any questions you have, submit it to us in writing. That was it. So we are working on some type of training, checklist or something to get GSA on one accord in doing this.
Well,
And HCAT will be a model for us.
And I think you know, the industry liaisons is a good place for you all to be that type of product manager, because the product is the acquisitions that are coming out of your department or agency. And if the industry has a place to go to say, look, you're really not open. And you're open on HCAT, you're open on EIS, but you're not open in these other places. You all ought to be the place that takes that feedback and works upstream to change. I think that's good. Mr. Gentleman here.
I commend GSA for their employee directory. You can find GSA people, and same thing's true at HHS. It's maintained by the PSC. You have some work to cut out for yourselves. You can't find anybody in procurement at DHS on the website. So that's a, well, it's a national secret, but it's security.
Well, let me repeat the gentleman's comment was that GSA has a great website. If you look at the very top, little blue thing called Staff Directory. You go there and you put in ROUSE, and all of a sudden Alex's email address or Kevin's phone number, everything pops up. I understand NIH is the same way. That is very valuable. DHS does not have anything like that. It is actually very hard to find somebody's phone number. And I will say they publish the industry liaisons, but not the other procurement people.
I called an employee at DHS who used to work for me when I was in government. She wouldn't give me any information about how to contact anybody.
Call Harrison about that.
No, and the other thing that I noticed that Soraya mentioned the action planning forecast system. That has points of contact for all the requirements over $150,000, emails and phone numbers associated with that. So I take your point and I understand it, sir. I'd like to talk to you more about it, but just as a quick other. And Jim, if I could step back quick to Chris's original question about who sort of spearheads that effort. I think in the Department of Homeland Security, you'll see not only spearheaded by Soraya Gray, the procurement officer, who's responsible for procurement throughout the department. She is the one who's delegated procurement authority, and then she delegates it further to the buying activities. She also mentioned the February 25th Strategic Industry Conversation event, where the secretary and the deputy secretary and the chief procurement officer spoke. She mentioned the RFI-RFP roundtable last week, which the USM and the deputy USM, Undersecretary for Management and the deputy Undersecretary for Management spoke at. We already picked on Jason earlier, but Jason had a conversation with the Secretary's Chief of Staff on how we engage with industry. So I think you'll find it within DHS throughout the organization. And clearly, if you have any concerns or issues, or areas for improvement, I would welcome those conversations and those topics. Thank you.
Thanks. Gentleman in the back?
Yeah, I've got two best practices actually that I like that's out there. The acquisition forecast. The information in there is absolutely valuable in terms of what contracts are going to be coming out, what the contract number of the incumbent is, the dollar value or kind of the ceiling of what they expect the opportunity to be, when it's going to come out, and the point of contact. Absolutely invaluable. And you can tell which agencies take that seriously. DHS, for sure, has an amazing system. I'm a huge Strive fan, or whoever implemented that. The NRC, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, absolutely amazing forecast. Department of Education, absolutely amazing. And it's valuable on the industry side because we can plan and tell which opportunities we've got to play at, and then which ones we don't. And for the ones that we don't, you know, all the people alone, but for the ones that we do, I know I have a very specific approach of how to go about getting information to figure out what the problem is and what we can solve it.
And you have a second best practice, you
Yeah,
said?
the second one, again, I gotta appreciate what you guys are doing with HCATs. Just the willingness to listen and to hear even the tiniest of voices. I mean, we're a small business, and you know, I recognize that we're a small fish in the sea here. But I had a great sort of engagement with the contracting officer, Mr. Miller. He picked up the phone and gave me a ring and challenged me to come up with a way to consider first-tier subcontracting past performance, and we did, and a huge, kind of a huge impact on the acquisition. So just the appreciation for that willingness to engage for even the technical.
Well, thanks. If I can ask the audience, how much do you all think the acquisition forecasting systems that you see are reliable and accurate? If you think they're reliable and accurate, the ones you use, raise your hands. How many think that they're not that reliable and not that accurate? And I think that's something for our industry liaisons and acquisition leaders to take back, because this gentleman, you're the only one who had your hand up, and frankly, I hear the opposite, that these things are not reliable.
Depends on the agency. I mean, I can tell you who sucks, and I can tell you who's awesome.
I think it also does, and I mean, it's one of the things that we continue to work on, especially at DHS. We used to have the AAP program, which was just the predecessor. Now we have APFS. And there's certainly areas to improve, but one of the things we also need to make sure that we clearly communicate to industry is that this is not our Gantt chart. This is not something that we're going to update on a monthly basis. It is a forecast that we provide. And frankly, if it's not that, we need to communicate what we're trying to tell you and how we're trying to tell you that. If we're not going to update it, if we are going to update it, the fact that is, you know, I actually had a question. Someone said, well, when you release the solicitation, how come you don't update the AAP, the APFS record with that? Like, because it's out of FedRAMP ops. It didn't even occur to me to say that. But again, we need to make sure that the message and the information that we're trying to provide, it's clear that that's what we're trying to do. So if we're not going to update it, and we're only going to update it ABC time, we need to tell you that.
Well, Harrison, I would suggest you look at Interact as a way to keep that dialogue going, to let people know, even when you don't know anything, let them know that. I think it's very helpful to industry. Gentleman over here.
Yeah, so I think the panelists, these are all government-wide contracts, and I think one of the things that's sometimes hidden for industry is all the collaboration that happens intra-government in putting one of these contracts together. I think the HCAT's team has done a tremendous job of collaborating with the commodity teams, Chico Council, senior procurement executives, CAO Council, et cetera. So I don't know if the panelists can talk a little bit about that process and what that adds to the acquisition.
Sure. The question was about how much interagency collaboration are these government-wide acquisition vehicles doing. And I think we've heard from Alex and Kevin and Mary, actually both talked about it, how they're really engaging a lot. And for those who all don't know, the Enterprise Infrastructure Solutions, it has a maximum value of $50 billion. You probably ought to pay attention to that one, but I know that they've worked extensively with other agencies. Right, Kevin?
Yeah, that has just been a core, because if you look at our programs, if you look at networks today, before that FTS 2001, FTS 2000, they've essentially, in many respects, strategic sourcing programs, because they really, most of government telecommunications spend here, virtually every agency is using these contract vehicles. So we're able to look at that overall government volume there when it comes to setting these contracts in place. But in order to do that effectively, we need to have good partnership with our customers, the other government agencies. So that's been, really a cornerstone of the way we've operated network services programs, is to be working closely with the other agencies there, the CIO and their infrastructure managers and the telecom managers there. So as we were embarking on this, even before we had the EIS acquisition, well, we're looking, okay, well, networks is what's going to be the follow-on to networks, what's going to be the follow-on to our LSAs, other contracts. Well, that's when we formed the Network Services 2020 strategy, and that's 2020 strategy. We had a series of executive level roundtables with CIOs, CAOs there, and it's really important involving both the program office side and the acquisition office side of agencies there. So we had those roundtables, and then after that, we formed the NS 2020 Interagency Advisory Panel. We were having approximately monthly meetings discussing with them the strategy as it was developed, and of course many just meetings with individual agencies too to discuss in depth their needs, what they want to see in the strategy, that piece. And then there's the the ACT-IAC, NT-SIG, and then the working group, which a lot of the industry, but that also has government too. So there's your government industry collaboration. So it's been really integral to this. We look at this not just as GSA's strategy, but really federal government's strategy going forward.
I think what we've found in the past too, a lot of times, not with HCATs, but an agency will build something with the mentality, if we build it, they will come. And as we all know, that doesn't always happen. We are taking the approach with HCATs, and we've done, and even in other vehicles, where GSA may be the acquisition arm, but we want to get consensus from the biggest buyers of certain commodities. We'll meet with them on a regular basis. HCATs, we try to meet with other agencies every 6 to 8 weeks at the latest, 8 weeks, to let them know what we're thinking, where we're moving forward, how we're building, similar to what we've been doing with industry, but it's very important for us to capture the consensus of other federal agencies so they will use it. Every agency thinks that they have the best contracting shop. And for whatever their niche is or whatever their specific discipline is, I would probably agree with that. But if you're working on something where you have, in HCATs, you have the expertise of OPM with human capital management, it's important that the other agencies recognize this. We want to hear we're listening to them with what they're looking for, what they envision with their future solutions, what would make them use this tool, because it's good for us, it's good for you. So we have approached the top buyers, and as Rich indicated, we've been talking to the Chico Council, keeping them apprised so they know what is coming, what's going to be available to them in the upcoming year, so they can educate their agencies on what's available to them and move forward that way.
Thanks.
Actually, yeah, if I forgotten one more really valuable thing to add on that is when it comes to working with other agencies, we're also looking post-award, not just putting in place the strategy and acquisition, but post-award. A big part of this is transitioning services from the current contracts to the future contracts. And that work, that planning work has already started, and it's just ramping up. And so we are working very closely with agencies on that piece there for transition. I know Debbie Wren, who's laughing back there, is actually our manager for transition, a big part of what we do. So working with agencies individually, we have ACT-IAC, that working group has a subcommittee focused just on transition for that government industry planning there, developing like a playbook for transition. We're going to be standing up another interagency advisory group focused on that, and that continued collaboration is going to be occurring even post-award here. So it's not just for developing the acquisition, but that's even important for the post-award environment.
Well, thanks. We have time for one last question. And by the way, if you're not familiar with how long it took to do transition last time, it was 6 years. And Debbie has put her life on the line, and she's going to significantly beat that. Any other comments or questions from the audience? You know, I want to thank the panel. I think what we've heard today is really a collection of best practices, and I think if we could take the attitudes and the best practices of each of these people individually together as a single set of best practices and then leverage them consistently across the government, I think we'd be in a much better place. I don't believe there's consistency today. I believe there's a lot of work to be done, and we want to ask your help in doing that for the rest of the morning. So before, Steve's going to come up and tell you what comes up next, but please give Harrison, Alex, Kevin, and Brian a round of applause.
And Jim's last comments were really a great segue to the next piece. It's time for the second set of table discussions this morning. I think you guys know the drill. On the table, there's a piece of paper that has a couple of questions related to the panel 2 discussion. We'll take 15 to 20 minutes. Table hosts facilitate. And as I said before, please, if you're a scribe, make sure that you're writing this down on something that you can turn to the registration desk if you want these ideas at the end of the morning.